You know, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program. Our book today is The Women's Suffrage Movement, edited by Sally Roche Wagner. It is a collection of essays by a whole variety of people, from Gloria Steinem to onward. This is from the foreword. With the women's suffrage movement, Sally Roche Wagner has given us a unique gift: the real words and actions, writings and debates of white and black women who fought for over a century to gain an identity as free human beings and citizens. For most of those years, black women were legally owned as chattel, forced to work and to suffer the unique punishment of giving birth to children who were also enslaved. White women were not as restricted and endangered as African women or men, but as the daughters and wives of white men, they were also legal chattel with no right to leave their homes, disobey orders, profit from their own work, speak in public, have custody of their own children, own property without a guardian, or affect the patriarchal laws that governed their lives. Even many white men who fought against slavery supported the subordinate position of their wives and daughters. When Susan B. Anthony, an abolitionist and a suffragist, sheltered not only runaway slaves, but white wives escaping violent husbands, male abolitionist allies warned her that she was going too far. As Frederick Douglass, a freed slave abolitionist and suffragist himself, wrote in his autobiography, "When the true history of the anti-slavery cause shall be written, women will occupy a large space in its pages, for the cause of the slave has been peculiarly women's cause." And this despite the fact that many white women, especially not only in the South, aided and abetted black slavery and accepted their own subordinate position as natural. A century later, Gunnar Myrdal would explain in his landmark study of slavery that enslaved African women and men brought to these shores had been given the legal status of wives as the nearest and most natural analogy to the status of slaves. As he added, quote, "The parallel between women and Negroes is the deepest truth of American life, for together they form the unpaid or underpaid labor on which America runs," end quote. Wagner takes us into the rooms, writings, and discussions where white and black women and black men, all fighting for legal personhood and full citizenship, were both a miracle of shared purpose, despite all the lethal forces keeping them apart, and a tragedy of division that echoes in the need for intersectionality and inclusion in this day. Even the lynching of black men, crimes designed to maintain the racial order after the Civil War, was most often justified by proximity to white women, however imaginary or freely chosen. This tells us how dangerous and brave was the coalition for universal adult suffrage that you will read about here. It also reveals the betrayal when white men split the coalition apart by offering the vote to black men first, only to then limit their votes with poll taxes, impossible literacy tests, and violence. Yet despite this tragic division, and despite being labeled as varying degrees of non-human, this fractious rebellion and fragile coalition did eventually succeed in gaining citizenship for the majority of people in this country. Wagner brings us these imperfect and hopeful rebellions of the past as they happened, complete with divisions and debates, and a long organizational disagreement among suffragists about whether to seek the vote by federal amendment or state by state. She doesn't attempt to prove a thesis or to explain mistakes or to excuse destructive divisions. Other than the first and last chapters, each one with a very specific purpose, she doesn't insert herself at all. Instead, she allows us to witness the words and acts, dreams and disappointments, victories and defeats, visionary ideas and tactical errors of people fighting a battle that laid the basis for our continuing movement against hierarchies based on race and gender. It is this faithfulness to the past that allows us to learn lessons for changes in the present. In 30 years or so, this will no longer be a majority white country. It will better reflect the diversity that has always been its strength and its promise. Indeed, the first generation that is majority babies of color has already been born, and public opinion polls already show that the majority of Americans no longer support divisions by race or by gender. Yet there is also a lethal backlash from about a third of the country, including over half of white married women, often those without a college education, who want to preserve their unearned place in the social and economic hierarchy. That's why these victories and defeats of the past become the best possible lessons and warnings for our present and future. By taking us into the rooms where history happened, Wagner allows us to see the parallels and differences, empathy and estrangements, connections and isolations that can hinder or help our goals now. Almost none of the people we will meet in these pages will live to celebrate the changes they are working for. This should tell us that social justice movements are not a temporary part of our lives. They are our lives. Most of the activists here were not sure that slavery would be abolished or that universal adult suffrage would ever succeed. This should give us humility about what we can predict and also arm us with faith and patience. Few guessed that the legal right to vote would come a half century later for white and black women than for black men, but would be mostly on paper. In the South, where most black Americans live, it would take another century plus an entire civil rights movement to overcome procedural and sometimes lethal barriers to voting. This should make us skeptical about changes that come from the top and that divide us more than empower us. And there are other lessons, and it continues, the women's suffrage movement.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, a lot of news, and we're going to really dig into in just a few minutes what's going to happen tonight when the networks granted Donald Trump, primetime television coverage to kick off his 2020 presidential campaign, which is exactly what he's doing. In fact, he's running ads on TV right now, paid for by his 2020 campaign, talking about how important it is to have a wall. You'll recall back 3 years ago that when President Obama wanted to address the nation to roll out the DACA program, also about immigration, the network said, no, that's partisan. You know, there's an election in November. We're not going to let you do that. That's partisan. This is not partisan. Anyhow, we're going to get into that and what Natalia Vetselnitskaya has to do with it and all kinds of other amazing stuff in a few minutes. But first, I wanted to get into Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, you know, we really should have a 70% tax rate. And, of course, we did. From the 1930s, from 1933 up until the mid-1980s, we had a 74% tax rate. And it was the period of time of the greatest prosperity in the United States. And it was also the period of time when the middle class, uniquely, in fact, if you look at the history of the United States, uniquely, it was a period of time when the middle class, the working class, people making less than back in those days, you know, in those dollars, $50,000 a year, their salaries and wages were actually growing faster than the salaries and wages of the top 1%. or of CEOs in general. Today, 95% of economic gains go to the top 1% in terms of net worth. The richest 1% in the United States now own more additional income than the bottom 90%. The total net worth of all U.S. households is $94 trillion. If you divided that among all 124 million households, that's $750,000 per household. Well, where's your share? It's being held by some insanely rich person. The wealthiest 1% own 40% of the nation's wealth. The bottom 80% only own 7%. So what do we do about this? I mean, historically, taxes have been the way that we have essentially prevented this from happening. Right now, the 400 wealthiest Americans in America have more wealth than half of Americans combined. On the line with us is Charles Sauer, libertarian, economist, and president of the Market Institute, author of the new book, Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. Came out yesterday. MarketInstitute.org is the website. You can tweet Charles at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. So tell me, how can you, and how do other libertarians for that matter, justify an economic system, progressively lowering taxes that leads to monopoly and oligarchy and stifles the wages of middle-class people? It's killing America. We're seeing lifespan go down for the first time since the 1950s. We're seeing infant mortality go up. We're seeing poverty increasing, all as a result of this insane tax policy that Ronald Reagan brought us.
Well, the way that we rejoice is that we don't tell history the way that the left does, which is just telling your own false history. First off, if we look at the high tax rates from back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s,
and 60s and 70s,
what we had was nobody actually paying those tax rates. We had a tax system where you could deduct your wife's business travel, not just deduct your own business travel or your own business meals, your own 3 martini lunch. That's what the left wants to not retell when they tell this history. So we rejoice that life is better. The fact that infant mortality is going down, it's going down in the U.S. because we're actually quantifying it at a lower...
Infant mortality is going up in red states.
Infant mortality is going up, but it's because we're actually keeping track at a younger
And Charles, this is a complete red herring to say that back in the 70s I could deduct my 3 martini lunch and any expenses, business expenses that my wife incurred. I don't think that's unreasonable, A, but B, that has nothing to do with how somebody who's making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, tens of millions of dollars a year, is what they're doing with that money, or how they're basically taking it out of the mouths of working people. The simple fact of the matter is, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s, CEOs made on average 30 times what their employees make. Right now, CEOs make on average 560 times what their employees make, and there's only one reason for that, and that is the change in the tax laws starting in the 1980s.
It doesn't, but the quality of life is increasing. Those same people
Not for working
maybe
people.
Couldn't afford a car then, and they might be able to afford a car now. And cars would be more affordable without the high regulations in place. Maybe they weren't able to get a TV, but guess what? TVs are now owned by everybody. If we look at poverty rates today, people have multiple telephones, multiple TVs, multiple cars. This is in a different world. Comparing those numbers is a retelling of history that doesn't make any sense.
Charles, a $200 TV is such a small piece of a family's household, 4 or 5 year budget, because a TV lasts 4 or 5 years typically, that to say that somebody's not poor because they own a TV is a slap, at the cost of what, $16, $18, $20 a year? I mean, that's an absolute slap in their face. I mean, I'm astonished that you would even use that kind of bizarre argument.
Those words. You're putting those words in my mouth. The words I used was increased quality of life. I'm saying that poor
I'm not talking about quality of life. I'm talking about wealth.
No, you were the one that just put words in my mouth. The fact
You're
is
trying to change the conversation away from who owns everything to, well, gee, poor people have a decent quality of life because they have a phone and a TV. That's a nonsense argument. If you're broke, if you're in debt, you've got a $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. You've got families who are making less money now than they were back in the 1960s. I mean, even the minimum wage is below what it was in the 1960s. It's about half of what it was in the 1960s if you inflation adjust it. I don't see what any of that has to do with the ability of a poor family to own a television.
I'm saying it increases their quality of life. You get more information,
Make them
and more understanding of what's going on. You understand how to pull yourself up out of poverty. And the fact is if you look at the research, the left has pushed enough federal laws that you can't live in. You can be poor, but you can't live in what's under the federal poverty level under today's circumstances if you're willing to get the programs that are out there.
Okay, so Charles, I get it, that you're fine with the situation as it is right now, and in fact, maybe you would like working people to have even less money, but and very, very wealthy people to have even more. But you never answered my original question, which is what's wrong with going back to the tax rate that we had from the 1930s to the 1980s, which was literally the singular period of the greatest prosperity of this country for pretty much everybody except the top 1%, and certainly for working people in the United States. What's wrong with going back to that kind of tax policy?
Well, I actually slipped it in and didn't think that you were going to take the bait, but you took it. The problem with it is that politically, to get that, you have to exempt so many things. And what we now have is a very progressive tax system, but it's a flatter tax. We have less deductions that people can take.
Wait a minute, are you saying that in order to get something
you can't deduct business meals?
You're saying that we can't have a high tax rate, which suppresses the top 1% basically from stealing all the wealth in the country. We can't have that because the top 1% owns so many Republicans they won't allow it to happen. In other words, it's not politically feasible. That's a pathetic argument for saying why it shouldn't happen.
No, I'm saying that all economists understand that that tax system is a bad thing. If you tax the wealthy at that rate, they're either not going to work or they're going to hide their money.
That's great. To hell with them. If they hide their money, the IRS will track them down and take it. And if they don't want to work, I don't want them here.
That is a fabrication of history. When the tax rate was, 91, 94%, people weren't paying that. The highest people were paying were like 66%, 45%, and that was still a ridiculous number. But that was what they were paying on their income on the marginal dollar. That wasn't even their overall tax rate. So if you start off with a made-up conversation, you can corner me into a made-up conclusion.
Okay, Charles, I get it. Here's the guy. This is Sean the 360 here. Here's the guy who raised the top tax rate from 25% to 91%.
On the one hand, there has been a vast majority of citizens who believe that the benefits of democracy should be extended and who are willing to pay their fair share to extend them. And on the other hand, there has been a small but powerful group which has fought the extension of these benefits because it did not want to pay a fair share of their costs.
He's saying basically the same stuff that Alexandria Ocasio said. In fact, here's another one.
Taxes, after all, are the dues that we pay for the privilege of membership in an organized society. And as society becomes more civilized, government, national and state and local, is called on to assume more obligations to its citizens. The privileges of membership in a civilized society have vastly increased in modern times. But I am afraid we have many who still do not recognize their advantages and want to avoid paying their dues.
Why is it that guys on your side, Charles, never even engage in this conversation?
Well, first off, let's just think back. I like hearing actual oratory, hearing somebody actually sell something. But that doesn't mean that he's not selling a bill of goods. That doesn't mean that he's not framing the conversation
more prosperity
in a
than this country's ever had.
No, that was created on the books. The fact is that what he's saying there is I'm spending money on the credit card so fast that you all need to spend more money, and I am going to define what
Charles,
is
when
fair
Reagan
and
came
what
into
is not.
office, the national debt wasn't even
thing.
$1 trillion. When Reagan came into office, the national debt was only $800 billion. Reagan tripled it, starting the two Santa Claus strategy. I get that, but you can't say that he was spending money on the national credit card. That's not what was happening.
Our economy.
Him and Eisenhower stimulated the economy.
Government is increasing and becoming more expensive. The fair share is rising. He said that in the speech.
Yeah.
You can't retell it minute to minute. The fact is what is going on here is that we had decimated the rest of the world. Of course, we were growing. We had all of this innovation that was happening. Our economy was booming. Right now, we're in an actual fight, a hand fight with the rest of the world on who's going to grow the economy.
Because we blew up Roosevelt's policies. We embraced neoliberalism.
Those policies were slowing down innovation. We now have more innovation in the private sector, and we're winning.
Okay, Charles Sauer, a libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute, his new book, Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. MarketInstitute.org. Tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. Charles, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we're going to get into this, what should be our tax policy, what should be our wealth policy, but also, how should we react tonight when Trump goes on TV and lies to all of us? And welcome back. Amazing stuff, huh? Rama in Williamstown, Vermont, the very first producer of the Thom Hartmann Program. Rama, it's always nice to hear from you.
Hi, Tom, and it's always nice to hear you.
Thank you.
It really is.
What's up?
And, I'm calling about the TVs. Mm-hmm. But I want to just preface with a quick statement, and someday I really think it needs to be explored. I think that, we're faced with Republicans trying to give us 1920s economic solutions and the Democrats trying to give us 1950s social solutions. And I don't think either are working well, personally. But I think the TVs, when people talk about TVs and some of these goods as a measure of wealth and why somebody's not poor when they could even have 2, 3, 4 TVs, the simple fact is there are so many televisions running around this country that when I have one that I want to get rid of, I can't give it away.
Wow.
So to tell me that, oh, gosh, they got a TV, it's like, no kidding, they got a TV.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if back in the 1920s and 30s when, or maybe even in the 19-teens when Woodrow Wilson raised the top tax rate to 90%, and then, of course, Harding dropped it back down to 25% in 1921, or started that process in 21. And then Roosevelt took it back up to 91% in 33, or started the process. I wonder if the Republicans were saying, well, you don't need to raise taxes to reduce poverty. I mean, poor people have books. If they wouldn't be, if they were really poor, they wouldn't even own a book.
Yeah, it really is silly. It goes back, and I was trying to rack my brain for the economic term, but there's an economic term for how you value something, for considering inflation, for instance, mm-hmm. and you reduce its book value because it was, or you increase the value of it while you can decrease the price of it because it comes out with some extra abilities in it. So, for instance, with computers, as we went from these 16-bit computers to 30-bit, 2-bit, and to 64-bit, and we went from the 486 and to the 586s and all these other high-powered, that as time went on, people, I remember when I first bought my first 386, which is a 36-bit computer, which at that time was a very high-end computer, and it cost me $2,500. Now, if I go spend $2,500, I can get a very powerful, a modern-day, up-to-the-date computer, and they're going to say, well, what you got is valued more because of all the extra abilities contained within that machine.
Right.
But the truth is, all of that is built on what came beforehand, so it's all very cumulative.
I agree. And by the way, those numbers, what you just described, Rama, is what the federal government uses to adjust the cost of living index. They say because computers are getting more powerful, but the price isn't going up, therefore your Social Security shouldn't go up, which is nuts.
Or Medicare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and because the truth is, yeah, and I've had a lot of discussions, even with Bernie Sanders back in the 90s when I was doing In the Air in Barrie. When I talked to Bernie Sanders regularly once or twice a month, the whole answer there was that, the inflation for old people never had anything to do with medical costs, which was their primary expense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We need a completely new consumer price index, although it's kind of tangential to the discussion. But Rama, thanks. It's great to hear from you. Always good talking with you. Literally the guy who helped us launch this show. We'll be back 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, tonight, Donald Trump is going to kick off, he's going to launch his 2020 presidential campaign. He's already running television ads for his 2020 campaign. I saw them this weekend on MSNBC and on CNN. The television ads talk about the wall and how Democrats want an open border and Democrats want to frustrate the president's attempts to keep us safe. Right? This is his reelection campaign. He's going to kick it off tonight. There's a very good chance that he's going to declare a national emergency. And in declaring that national emergency, will immediately provoke a series of lawsuits from Democrats and probably from lots of other people and organizations saying, wait a minute, there's not a real emergency on the border. Outside of possibly the lack of immigration judges or asylum judges. But there's no national security crisis on the southern border. In fact, the border crossings and attempted border crossings right now are at about 10% of what they were just 20 years ago. The last 10 years have been among the lowest since the 50s. I mean, we're just like really, really, really low numbers. Now, part of that's the recession, just reduced economic opportunity for people who want to cross the border. And pretty much all that's left now, people trying to get into the United States now are not trying to get into the United States because they want a, quote, better life. They're not looking for better paychecks. They're trying to flee death squads. But in any case, Trump is going to say this, and there will be an immediate lawsuit. And the consequence of that lawsuit is twofold. Number one, his policies, his state of emergency, may, in all probability, get set aside. This is going to be a defining moment for John Roberts on the Supreme Court. Is he able to salvage the reputation of this court as not being Trump toadies? Or will the Trump toadies on the court, Thomas and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Alito, will the Trump toadies on the court have enough power to basically say, okay, Donald, it's cool, but, we'll see. But in any case, here's my take on what's going on tonight and what Donald Trump is really up to. My take is that he painted himself into a corner with this stunt, which Hannity and Ingram talked him into doing. Okay, he painted himself into a corner. He needs to get out of this corner and save some face. He had a meeting at Camp David last weekend or maybe it was at the White House last weekend where he said, okay, you guys figure out how to get me out of this and save face. They went back and crunched some things, and they came back to him and they said, okay, here, it's real simple. Number one, declare an emergency on the border and say you're going to have the Army build a wall. Number two, the Democrats will sue you. So you don't actually have an emergency and you don't have to build a wall. Because Donald Trump doesn't want to build a wall any more than for the last 40 years or probably 50 years, Republicans have wanted to criminalize abortion. They just want to yell about it. So number two, you get stopped. Number three, now that you have taken your big action, made your big grand gesture, you can move on and open the government, which he will in all probability do tomorrow, right? The part two of this is he's going to give Mitch McConnell permission to bring to the floor of the Senate the bill that was passed the House last week that reopens the government. And he's going to take credit for it. He's going to say, see, I reopened the government. I resolved the crisis that he's not going to say that he created, but I resolved the crisis. I alone can do it. And that's in my opinion, that's what's going to happen. And it's all a scam. It's all, this is, as I said, it needs to be said over and over and over again. Tonight, Donald Trump kicks off his 2020 re-election campaign. He's already raised over $100 million for his re-election. And he's fundraising right now on the wall. I've gotten 2 fundraising emails from him in the last 2 days, begging for money because he's got to fight the Democrats on the wall.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
To talk to the country about DACA. Oh, that was political, but no, it's just fine. We'll put him on the air. Come on. Yeah. Our book today is Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World by Anand Giridharadas. This is from the prologue. All around us in America is the clank, clank, clank of the new in our companies and economy, our neighborhoods and schools, our technologies and social fabric. But these novelties have failed to translate into broadly shared progress and the betterment of our overall civilization. American scientists make the most important discoveries in medicine and genetics and publish more biomedical research than those of any other country, but the average American's health remains worse and slower improving than that appears in other rich countries, and in certain years, life expectancy actually declines. American inventors create astonishing new ways to learn thanks to the power of video and the internet, many of them free of charge, but the average 12th grader tests more poorly in reading today than in 1992. The country has had a culinary renaissance, as one publication put it, one farmer's market and Whole Foods at a time, but it has failed to improve the nutrition of most people, with the incidence of obesity and related conditions rising over time. The tools for becoming an entrepreneur appear to be more accessible than ever for the student who learns coding online or the Uber driver, but the share of young people who own a business has fallen by 2/3 since the 1980s. America has birthed a wildly successful online book superstore called Amazon, and another company, Google, has scanned more than 25 million books for public use, but illiteracy has remained stubbornly in place, and the fraction of Americans who read at least one work of literature a year has dropped by almost a quarter in recent decades. The government has more data at its disposal and more ways of talking and listening to citizens, but only 1/4 as many people find it trustworthy as in the tempestuous 1960s. A successful society is a progress machine. It takes in the raw material innovation and produces broad human advancement. America's machine is broken. When the fruits of change have fallen on the United States in recent decades, the very fortunate have basketed almost all of them. For instance, the average pre-tax income of the top 10th of Americans has doubled since 1980. That of the top 1% has more than tripled, and that of the top 0.001% has risen more than 7-fold, even as the average pre-tax income of the bottom half of Americans has stayed almost precisely the same. These familiar figures amount to 3.5 decades worth of wondrous head-spinning change with zero impact on the average pay of 117 million Americans. Meanwhile, the opportunity to get ahead has been transformed from a shared reality to a prerequisite of already being ahead. Among Americans born in 1940, those raised at the top of the middle class and the bottom of the lower middle class shared a roughly 90% chance of realizing the so-called American dream of ending up better off than their parents. Among Americans born in 1984 and maturing into adulthood today, the new reality is split screen. Those raised near the top of the income ladder now have a 70% chance of realizing the dream. Meanwhile, those close to the bottom, more in need of elevation, have a 35% chance of climbing above their parents' station. And it's not only progress and money that the fortunate monopolize. Rich American men, who tend to live longer than the average citizens of any other country, now live 15 years longer than poor American men, who endure only as long as men in Sudan and Pakistan. Thus, many millions of Americans on the left and right feel one thing in common, that the game is rigged against people like them. Perhaps this is why we hear constant condemnation of the system, for it is the system that people expect to turn fortuitous developments into societal progress. Instead, that system in America and around the world has been organized to siphon the gains from innovation upward such that the fortunes of the world's billionaires now grow at more than double the pace of everyone else's. And the top 10% of humanity have come to hold 90% of the planet's wealth. It's no wonder that the American voting public, like other publics around the world, has turned more resentful and suspicious in recent years, embracing populist movements on the left and the right, bringing socialism and nationalism into the center of political life in a way that once seemed unthinkable, and succumbing to all manner of conspiracy theories and fake news. There is a spreading recognition on both sides of the ideological divide that the system is broken and has to change. Some elites, faced with this kind of gathering anger, have hidden behind walls and gates on landed estates, emerging only to try to seize even greater political power to protect themselves against the mob. But in recent years, a great many fortunate people have also tried something else, something both laughable and self-serving. They've tried to help by taking ownership of the problem. All around us, the winners in our highly inequitable status quo declare themselves partisans of change. They know the problem, and they want to be part of the solution. Actually, they want to lead the search for solutions. They believe that their solutions deserve to be at the forefront of social change. They may join or support movements initiated by ordinary people looking to fix aspects of our society, but more often these elites start initiatives of their own, taking on social change as though it were just another stock in their portfolio or another corporation to restructure. The book, Winners Take All, by Anand Giridharadas.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm going to get to your calls in just a moment. First, there's just two other things that I wanted to share with you that have to do with this topic of the Trump shutdown of the federal government and why he's doing it and how we can respond to it. First of all, the lines at TSA are growing. And this is apparently because a lot of TSA agents are calling in sick rather than work without a paycheck. And increasingly, there are people who may be, in the pipeline to become TSA agents. This is also happening over on the air traffic controller side. 1 in 5 air traffic controllers right now is eligible for retirement. And are they going to start taking retirement? I mean, these could be big deals. And this is one of the reasons why Trump is going to end the shutdown tonight, because he sees that it's really starting to cut. Or maybe he's going to end it at the end of Saturday night so he can claim it was the longest shutdown in history, even longer than Newt Gingrich's. But in any case, number one, it occurred to me, if the workers at TSA, if there are any TSA workers listening to me right now, and I know a lot of you do because you say hi to me when I come through airports. So to the TSA workers who might be listening right now, prioritize, if you're going to focus your attention on not showing up for a particular part of your job, focus on the pre-checked lines. I'm a pre-checked traveler, and the one thing I've noticed about pre-checked travelers is that they tend to be more affluent and thus have more influence. They're the executives, the news reporters, the whatnot. They're the people who travel frequently and have a little more money. And I remember, 6 months ago or so, showing up at the Portland airport, and the pre-check line was closed. Now, it turned out that there was some guy who was sick or something, and it wasn't, terrible because the regular line only had about 20 people in it. It was like a 5 a.m. flight. But the pre-check line was closed, and I was like, whoa. And if the pre-check lines were to close or start getting really, really slow and really long, that's when the networks are going to pay attention. That's when the media is going to pick this up, number one. And number two, this whole thing, this indictment that just came out for Natalia Veselnitskaya, she's representing some Russian oligarchs who had this scam going where they stole the identity, functionally, of a legitimate company. And then they had their company sue this phony version of the legitimate company. So it'd be like, okay, I've got this business, the Thom Hartmann Program, and I steal the identity of AT&T. And in other words, I find out what their employer ID number is and, just basic stuff. And then I create the documentation for a phony lawsuit that I'm suing AT&T because I don't like something they did, and they sue me back, and they win $100 million. In my case, it would be more like $5,000, you know, that I might be able to deduct. And so, okay, they won $5,000. So I put that on the books of my little company and say, you know, I have a $5,000 loss. I had to pay this judgment against me. And then I take that $5,000 and I launder it, I hide it. In the case of what Vesselskaya was doing, it was over $100 million. In fact, it was over $200 million. And $230 million specifically in tax refunds. And then I take that money, okay, I've got this money that I've basically stolen from myself, from my own company, and without paying taxes on it. And I need to hide it in the United States. What do? I buy Manhattan high-end real estate. Now, who happens to be selling a lot of Manhattan high-end real estate, particularly to foreigners? Donald Trump. I see this as a metaphorical or legal sniper shot. I shouldn't even use that metaphor. I see this as a cannon pointing at the Trump crime family. This is the thing that could take them down. That ever since the bank stopped loaning to Donald because his business skills were so bad that he bankrupted all his companies, and you know every company he started pretty much has failed. He started taking money. You know, he started being Mr. Money Laundering, and this could take him down. So the whole wall thing in tonight's address becomes a great way to divert our attention away from this. So anyhow, to your thoughts, John in Rolling Meadows, Illinois. Hey, John, what's up?
Tom, I was wondering, do you have a degree in economics?
No, I don't, John. Sorry.
Yeah, by listening to this program, I did not think so.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. David in Oceanside, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind? I just have no interest right now in debating fools. What's up, David?
Yeah, I want to talk about the guest you had on. His name escapes me, but he was talking about how bad the quality of life was back in the 60s.
Charles Sauer, yeah.
I happen to know that I'm about your age, and I was 10 years old in 1965. I lived in a house. My father, who was a blue-collar worker with a union job, he was paying a mortgage. He owned 2 cars, was raising 5 kids. My mother worked even though she didn't have to. And, we had nice stuff. We went on vacations. And I'm listening to him say how bad things were back when the tax rate was in the 70%. And I'm just shaking my head. This guy's full of it. You know?
Yeah, I didn't get into it with Charles, but the fact of the matter is, in 1965, I was living in, 13 years old, and living in Lansing, Michigan. My dad was working at a tool and die shop, Lansing Tool and Die, a unionized.
I'm a machinist too. So
right. Yeah, in the machinist union, and with 2 years of college, but he wasn't using that, and he was able to, he bought his house, he bought a car. In fact, he bought a new car every 2 or 3 years. He was fond of Buicks because they made parts for Buick.
My dad was a Chevy man.
Yeah, we took vacations every year, 2 weeks of vacation, which was paid for by the company. Typically, we just go up to northern Michigan and things like that. We had friends of mine in the same neighborhood, and this was a $13,000 house we lived in that he bought in '56 for $13,000. Friends of mine in that neighborhood, and they're worth about $90,000 now. So you get a sense of what how we grew up.
Exactly the way I grew up.
My friends in that neighborhood, I had several friends who had little cabins or cottages up in Houghton, up in northern Michigan that they'd go to in the summertime because they had good union jobs. He was able to raise 4 boys, and it was a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. I mean, it wasn't luxurious, but we had a good life.
Yeah, Tom, and one other real quick thing I want to say about environmental regulations. Where I was growing up was a town called Barstow, California. And this is on the interstate about halfway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, way up in the Mojave Desert.
Right.
And we had pretty clean air. We had family in San Bernardino and Los Angeles, and we would drive up, the road 15 and come down Cajon Pass into the LA Basin, which is, San Bernardino's right up against the mountains.
Right.
And in 1968, they were putting lead in the gasoline. There was,
the air was yellow.
High compressions. It was brown.
Yeah.
We drove into it frequently. It was brown. And by the time we got halfway to San Bernardino, our lungs would burn and our eyes would sting and our lungs would burn. And I hear people talk about, the EPA and all these regulations, they're hurting us bad. And, And they're mostly younger people who did not see the brown air that I saw growing up.
And those same years, the
not there
Cuyahoga
anymore.
River caught on fire 13 times. Lake Erie was functionally dead, all because of pollution. We had, this was the setup for massive cancer deaths in the subsequent decades. Yeah, absolutely right. David, I want to get some other callers in here, but thanks for the call. Howard in Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. Hey, Howard, what's up?
Yeah, Tom. Excuse me. I think the Democrats should use this kind of a strategy. For whatever Trump wants and needs to find some money, take it out of the tax cut for the billionaires.
Yeah.
They can rewrite that law, and that's where he can find some money.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, these conservatives who are all over TV right now saying, well, if you raise the top tax rate to 70%, that would only generate about $700 billion over a decade. That's not enough to do anything with. Well, raising it to 70% would do that? How is it then that dropping the top tax rate from 39% to 37%, which is what Trump just did last year, cut $1.5 trillion out of tax revenues? Really? I mean, if cutting it by 2%, decreases tax revenues by $1.5 trillion, why would raising it by 30% only increase tax revenues by 7/10 of a trillion dollars? I don't get it. It's shall we say fuzzy math?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Howard, thanks a lot for the call. Carol in Clinton, Illinois. Hey, Carol, what's up?
I'd like to know why or when and how did the government put in their right to close down the government, because the citizens are the ones who pay their salaries.
Yeah. Well, the simple formula is, Carol, that the only branch of government which can raise money through taxes or spend money through federal appropriations is the U.S. House of Representatives. All spending and taxing legislation has to originate in the House of Representatives. It's in the Constitution. The founders put it in there, or the framers put it in there, because they wanted the agency, the federal group that is reelected every 2 years and so is most directly responsible to the people, answerable to the people. They wanted them to have the power of the purse. And the president doesn't have the power of the purse. He takes the money that they appropriated through taxes and he spends that money. And if he has run out of money, which is what's happened now because they haven't renewed the budget, if he runs out of money, he can't keep spending the money, which is why all these government shutdowns are happening. So, this is our constitutional system at work, and I think it's a good one. Carol, thanks for the question. It's a great one. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, well, let me kind of, for Carol's benefit here, too, and for everyone's benefit, point out this shutdown replay. Let's think about something here. The Democrats actually have not, in effect, opposed Trump's wall with votes. They have done, and this is an important point, the Democrats have supported all along keeping the government open, and I'm talking about the December 18th continued spending bill, unanimous support in the Senate, all Democrats voted for it, and big bipartisan support in the House.
Yeah, it was over 80 votes.
Trump reneged on and said he's not going to sign. It was the following day, or December 20th, when the Paul Ryan House passed another bill out of the House with money for the wall. Mitch McConnell never even brought it to the floor of the Senate.
Right. Which is where it would have passed, by the way.
Democrats. Trump's beef is with the 115th Republican Congress. He has essentially now locked out the 116th Congress with Democrats in control of the House of Representatives, and he has offered them nothing, absolutely nothing. He's taken the nation hostage, and that term should be, he's taken the nation hostage, and he's saying, just give me the money and I'll release the hostages. We don't negotiate like that. Right. And what I wanted to get to is that Democrats should, at some point, now start making New Deal and Square Deal demands on opening the government. And I mean that because both Franklin Roosevelt and Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, had progressive policies that took the nation forward. And for your conversation with Charles Sauer, it was FDR that essentially, I won't say created the middle class, but made it from something that was very small, essentially, as you've pointed out, the mercantile and the professional class, to all of us, to most of us.
Right.
And if you want evidence for that, it was only 1920 when more than 50% of the people in the nation lived in cities rather than on farms. If you're living on a farm, you were not middle class. And not only that, if there was still child labor. That's not middle class. It was Francis Perkins and Eleanor Roosevelt who got rid of child labor and the New Deal policies that got rid of child labor. That's middle class. And here's another thing: they keep pointing out your guest Charles said, well, everyone has a TV. Isn't this just reminiscent of the Hoover era? Of chicken in every pot and a car in every driveway. If you have stuff, that means that you're moving along. Well, I'm sorry, Tom, but when I was a kid, we were poor and we had 2 TVs.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my
I don't
point.
find that as a measure of middle class, but that's what you keep hearing, one conservative after another referring to.
I know. Paul, I had this argument with a conservative on this show 13 years ago. I mean, 15 years ago. They've always been saying, well, people have TV. They have air conditioning in the South. How can you call them poor? Right. Paul, spot on. Thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back. It's 48 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
The whole point that I'm making is that Trump doesn't care if he gets his wall. He just wants to be seen as taking a stand, and then he wants to move this off the discussion. And welcome back. I'd like to play another FDR clip, if I may, out of the 360 here, Sean. This is FDR again on taxes.
But you would think, to hear some people talk, that those good people who live at the top of our economic pyramid are being taxed into rags and tatters. But what is the fact? The fact is that they are much further away from the poorhouse than they were in 1932. And you and I know that as a matter of personal observation.
There you go. And then here, this is the killer one.
A number of my friends who belong in these very high upper brackets have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
There you go. Okay. Carol in Manassas, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Hi. What's on my mind is this speech he's going to make tonight.
Right.
I find it just appalling that the networks have now become as complicit in his madness as the Congress has.
They have been from the get-go. They have been from the time that he declared his candidacy. He got $2 billion worth of free television time during the primaries and the general election.
Yeah, it's about ratings. It's about ratings.
Yep, and he's a reality TV star, and he's going to go on TV tonight. And they're like, oh, sure, we'll take the Trump show.
Absolutely. I mean, I am really, really frightened of this man at this point. Did you happen to read the New York Times article by David Leon Hart?
Yes, I
yesterday?
did. About all the reasons why he should be impeached right now.
Oh,
yes, it's brilliant.
There is no question that they are supporting a dangerous man with dangerous ideas who is about to heap chaos upon chaos with this speech tonight, because that's what he thrives on, and I honestly believe it's his way of just grabbing the narrative to get his way.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's going to open the government. I don't think so. I think he's just going to keep it more chaotic. The more chaotic, the better he likes it.
I think he's going to open the government because he has, if he can declare a state of emergency, declare that he's now going to have the army build the wall, and then say, and therefore I will reopen the government, all the Fox viewers are going to go, wow, he won, and now we get our paychecks back, and now we don't have to worry about our food stamps, vanishing next week. And so we're happy, we like him. And then immediately it goes into the courts and nothing happens, but that's fine. That won't be reported on Fox News, and Trump, or to the extent that it is, Trump will be able to say, well, now you've got the courts fighting me. So he gets to be a martyr all over again.
Well, the problem is that I would not allow a madman to declare a national emergency with all the powers that go with that, even if he could do it, which he can't. But I think he will try.
Oh, actually he can, Carol. There are very few restrictions on the president's ability to declare a national emergency.
Well, he can declare it, but the courts will come in.
Oh, well, that's my point. He wants the courts. It was just like the Muslim ban, right? The Muslim ban lost 3 times in a row in court. He loved it. Every single time it moved to the front of the discussion in the media, and Trump got to say one more time to his racist Fox viewers, "I'm keeping those brown people out of this country," and to his Christian, Muslim-phobic people, "I'm keeping the Muslims out of the country." I mean, this is what he wants. They are playing his game. Carol, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. 53 minutes past the hour. The one argument, by the way, that Charles Sauer made that I've heard over and over and over again, and literally we have been hearing since the 1930s, is that if tax rates on very rich people go up, the rich people will stop, quote, creating prosperity. And here's a Democratic president, Franklin Roosevelt, responding to that with words that need to be memorized by every Democratic politician in America. Sean, it's the 360.
A number of my friends who belong in these very high upper brackets have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
That's got to be your answer. Okay, they're going to have to leave, or they're going to have to, fine, let them go on welfare. I mean, whatever. Mike in Winnicott, Wisconsin, if I'm saying that right. Mike, what's up?
Yeah, Winnicott, yep.
Winnicott.
I was calling to agree with you that the carnival barker's going to get up there tonight and scream, because 47% of the people that voted for him. Yeah. And the hands down in this country are racist, and a good percent are card-holding KKK members. And people got to understand that.
Yeah, and Trump, and what America needs to understand, and what the networks need to understand, is that Trump doesn't care if he gets the wall or not. He just wants an opportunity to scream about it. And so if he declares a state of emergency and says he's going to have the military build the wall, and immediately there's lawsuits, this is just like the Muslim ban. The Muslim ban went before the federal courts 3 different times. Every time Trump got to go on TV or on Twitter and yell about how I'm trying to protect America and the courts are frustrating me, he gets to play martyr. He gets to play the victim card that the conservatives so love, and the Fox News will double and triple down on. And he gets to reopen the government tomorrow or the next day or maybe on Sunday so that he can claim it's the longest government shutdown ever. And the people in West Virginia will be watching Fox News going, well, I guess we're getting our food stamps back. Yeah, you nailed it, Mike. Thanks a lot for the call. Gran in New York City. Hey, Gran, what's up?
It's Glenn.
Oh, Glenn, I'm sorry.
This national emergency that Trump is threatening, I think the whole purpose is to eliminate habeas corpus. He has 17 investigations plus the Miller trial if he can start arresting people.
Yes.
And that would cause a protest in the streets and riot in the streets, and then he can declare martial law. I think the whole thing is to cover up.
Lincoln did it. Franklin Roosevelt did it. They both basically suspended habeas corpus. The Japanese who were interned during World War II had no recourse at court, and the Supreme Court backed Roosevelt up on that, by the way. And Lincoln did during the Civil War. It could well be the suspending habeas corpus and moving us into a true state of emergency where the president becomes essentially a mini dictator, that really is Trump's endgame. Nobody is speculating about that because it's just too horrible a thing to contemplate. But there was that article in The Atlantic last week about what the president's powers become during a state of emergency, and it's truly frightening. Glenn, thank you for the call. Spot on. Liz in Fort Bragg, California. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Hi there, yeah.
Thanks for listening to KNYO, by the way.
Yes, absolutely agree with you that this is a political stunt, and he's just fundraising. I got the letters too, emails too. You know, the consequences of this, I'm a furloughed federal employment, and, you know, most of the environmental scientists and the scientists of the federal government are furloughed. EPA has something like less than 10% of their staff on the job. That's from nature.com, an article I saw.
Yeah. So
Anyway,
I'm sorry, Liz, we're out of time. I should have not put you on immediately. I missed my time cue. But so basically, you know, all the government scientists are amazing. Liz, thanks for letting us know. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. Our book today is Mortal Republic, How Rome Fell into Tyranny by Edward J. Watts. This is from the first chapter, which I think is really more like an introduction. This book explains why Rome, still one of the longest lived republics in world history, traded the liberty of political autonomy for the security of autocracy. It's written at a moment when modern readers need to be particularly aware of both the nature of the republics and the consequences of their failure. We live in a time of political crisis when the structures of republics as diverse as the United States, Venezuela, France, and Turkey are threatened. Many of these republics are the constitutional descendants of Rome, and as such, they have inherited both the tremendous structural strengths that allowed the Roman Republic to thrive for so long, and some of the same structural weaknesses that led eventually to its demise. This is particularly true of the United States, a nation whose basic constitutional structure was deliberately patterned on the idealized view of the Roman Republic presented by the 2nd century BC author Polybius. This conscious borrowing from Rome's model makes it vital for all of us to understand how Rome's Republic worked, what it achieved, and why, after nearly 5 centuries, its citizens ultimately turned away from it and toward the autocracy of Augustus. No republic is eternal. It lives only as long as its citizens want it. And in both the 21st century AD and the 1st century BC, when a republic fails to work as intended, its citizens are capable of choosing the stability of autocratic rule over the chaos of a broken republic. When freedom leads to disorder and autocracy promises a functional and responsive government, even citizens of an established republic can become willing to set aside long-standing principled objections to the rule of one man and embrace its practical benefits. Rome offers a lesson about how citizens and leaders of a republic might avoid forcing their fellow citizens to make such a tortured choice. Rome shows that the basic, most important function of a republic is to create a political space that is governed by laws, fosters compromise, shares government responsibility among a group of representatives, and rewards good stewardship. Politics in such a republic should not be a zero-sum game. The politician who wins a political struggle may be honored, but one who loses should not be punished. The Roman Republic did not encourage its leaders to seek complete and total political victory. It was not designed to force one side to accept everything the other wanted. Instead, it offered tools that, like the American filibuster, served to keep the process of political negotiation going until a mutually agreeable compromise was found. This process worked very well in Rome for centuries, but it worked only because most Roman politicians accepted the laws and norms of the Roman Republic. They committed to working out their disputes in the political arena that the Republic established rather than through violence in the streets. Republican Rome succeeded in this more than perhaps any other state before or since. If the early and middle centuries of Rome's Republic show how effective this system can be, the last century of the Roman Republic reveals the tremendous dangers that result when political leaders cynically misuse these consensus-building mechanisms to obstruct a republic's functions. Like politicians in modern republics, Romans could use vetoes to block votes on laws. They could claim the presence of unfavorable religious conditions to annul votes they disliked, and they could deploy other parliamentary tools to slow down or shut down the political process if it seemed to be moving too quickly toward an outcome that they disliked. When used as intended, these tools help promote negotiations and political compromises by preventing majorities from imposing solutions on minorities. But in Rome, as in our world, politicians could also employ such devices to prevent the Republic from doing what its citizens needed. The widespread misuse of these tools offered the first signs of sickness in Rome's Republic. Much more serious threats to republics appear when arguments between politicians spill out from the controlled environments of representative assemblies and degenerate into violent confrontations between ordinary people in the streets. Romans had avoided political violence for 3 centuries before a series of political murders rocked the Republic in the 130s and 120s BC. Once mob violence infected Roman politics, however, the institutions of the Republic quickly lost their ability to control the contexts and content of political disputes. Within a generation of the first political assassination in Rome, politicians had begun to arm their supporters and use the threat of violence to influence the votes of assemblies and the elections of magistrates. Within 2 generations, Rome fell into civil war, and 2 generations later, Augustus ruled as Roman emperor. When the Republic lost the ability to regulate the rewards given to political victors and the punishments inflicted on the losers of political conflicts, Roman politics became a zero-sum game in which the winner reaped massive rewards and the losers often paid with their lives. Above all else, the Roman Republic teaches the citizens of its modern descendants the incredible dangers that come along with condoning political obstruction and courting political violence. Roman history could not more clearly show that when citizens look away as their leaders engage in these corrosive behaviors, the Republic is in mortal danger. Unpunished political dysfunction prevents consensus and encourages violence. In Rome, it eventually led Romans to trade the Republic for the security of an autocracy. This is how a republic dies. Mortal republic.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the previous hour, we had our debate with Charles Sauer about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's tax policies, and we've been talking about what Trump is going to do tonight. Tonight, you are going to see the official launch of the Trump 2020 for President campaign. That's what's going on. It's just that simple. And the way you know this is that for the last 3 days, the Trump campaign has been running ads on television, 1 minute, 60-second ads talking about the wall. And at the very end, they say, paid for by the Trump re-election campaign. And Donald Trump says, I authorize this expenditure. Where's that effect? This is the campaign. Now, when Barack Obama in 2016 asked the networks to address the nation on an evening during prime time to roll out his DACA program, the deferred arrivals, whatever it is, the program for young people who were brought to this country. When he asked for time to roll that out, the network said, no. You just want to do this to help Democrats. We're not going to put you on the air. Back in 2006, when George W. Bush wanted to go before the nation to talk about immigration, the network said, fine. The networks seem to have a thing about Republicans. If you look at any of the Sunday shows, it's mostly Republicans. If you look at throughout the day, most of the commentators and most of the panelists are Republicans. But anyhow, this is the rolling out of the campaign. It's going to happen tonight, number one. Number two, I believe that he's going to, here's what I predict is going to happen. Donald Trump declares a state of emergency and says the military can now build my wall. Case closed. I can dust my hands off. I did a good job, and let's move on. Mitch McConnell, you take up that legislation from the Democrats in the House and put it in the Senate and allow a vote. It'll pass, and we all know it'll pass. And the government will open back up on Thursday or Friday, or optimally, I think in Trump's world, the government will open up on Sunday because that way he can claim that he has the longest shutdown in the history of the United States. And what it all is about is two things. Number one, pandering to his base, saying, look, I went to the mat to stop those brown people from coming into the United States. Have you noticed they don't even speak English? This is at the core of his entire presidency. This was the issue that he rolled out when he first announced his candidacy as a stunt to try to get NBC to pay him more than Gwen Stefani back in 2015. This has always been his central focus, is keep out the brown people. So, he gets to do that, number one. But number two, this sucks up all the oxygen in the room for other discussions. There's no discussion in the media right now, no serious discussion about the crimes of the Trump crime family. There's no serious discussion about, the actual, Trump was named in a public indictment of Michael Cohen as the guy who ordered Michael Cohen to commit a crime that he's now going to prison for 3 years for. Well, if Trump ordered it, he should be going to prison for at least 3 years. No discussion. Let's talk about something else, right? This is what Trump wants. Let's talk about something else. So, as soon as he does this, as soon as he says the military is going to build the wall, the Democrats and the ACLU and a bunch of other organizations are going to sue him in federal court. The federal courts will say, nope, Trump, you can't do it until we decide. On the Republican side, on Fox News, on right-wing hate radio, they're all going to be going, oh my God, the courts are legislating from the bench. They're frustrating our wonderful president's attempt to stop the brown people from coming here. This is going to be their thing. He gets to be a martyr all over again, which he wants. He wants the courts to stop him. It was the same with his Muslim ban. He didn't care if they were actually banned. He knew that Muslims coming into the United States didn't represent a threat. But he also knew that it was good politics when you're pandering to a white racist base, a tiny white racist base. He's doing the same thing right now. He wants the courts to stop him so that he can say, well, I'm the victim again. Me and all you conservatives out there, we're the victims. It's their trump card, pun intended. The conservatives are just these pathetic snowflakes. Oh my God, he won't let us. And so he gets to declare victory. Okay, I declared an emergency. I did everything I could. He gets to reopen the government and save face in the process, which is really what this is all about. He kicks off his 2020 re-election campaign for President of the United States. He's already running the ads, been doing so for 3 days. And he reopens the government, and he hands to the federal courts the role of villain in his little morality play where he can continue to say, oh, I'm the poor victim here. And John Roberts may just be, John Roberts has been consistently sucking up to Republicans, blowing up the Voting Rights Act with Shelby County, the Shelby County decision. granting corporate personhood, blocking good government legislation, the Citizens United and other. I mean, just the whole series of, yes, we'll do whatever the Republicans want, saying that it's okay for Texas to basically, racially ban people from voting, essentially, and on and on. Now that Roberts is starting to be called out a lot, there is some speculation that John Roberts will say, and he will defy Alito and Thomas and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, the four, all Trump, all right-wing, hardcore right-wing guys on the Supreme Court, that Roberts might defy them and say, I'm going to vote with the liberals on this. But whichever way it goes, if Trump wins in the Supreme Court, he wins. He gets a state of emergency. With a state of emergency, he can arrest anybody he wants. He can say that, you fill in the blank, right? You, Thom Hartmann, a liberal talk show host. He is a designated person. He might be engaged in suspicious activity, and therefore close all his bank accounts. Shut down his mortgage. Stop everything. Right? I mean, literally, when the president declares a state of emergency, he can designate individuals, citizens of the United States, and shut them down, close all their banking activity, forbid their employer from writing a check to them any longer. By the way, this has been done. It was done by George W. Bush under the guise of a state of emergency. It was done to people who had connections to Muslim terrorists, but it was done. And it turned out with two of those people that those ties didn't even exist. He still did it. So Trump gets enormous powers if he wins at the Supreme Court. If he loses at the Supreme Court, he still wins because he gets to go on Fox News and he gets to go on right-wing hate radio and say, I'm the victim here. The courts are frustrating my attempts to save America from invasions by brown people. And all of the white racist right-wing yahoos out there in Trump land and all across America where the only station you can get on your radio is right-wing hate radio, they'll all go, yep, I guess so, yep. Hey, Donald Trump looking out for my white skin interests. You get what's going on here? And then on top of this, now just today, Natalia Vetselnskaya was indicted for running this, for fronting for a company, the Russian company, that was running this incredible scam. They created a false identity which was identical to another company. It would be the equivalent of, Thom Hartmann, the Thom Hartmann Program. I have this little business, the Thom Hartmann Program, saying, I'm going to, on the internet, I found the employer ID number for AT&T. I know what it is. And so I'm going to create a phony lawsuit. It's going to look like AT&T sued me and that I lost and that I had to pay them $1 million. And so what can I do now? I can claim $1 million tax deduction. I have a loss on the books, right? I had to pay AT&T. Claim $1 million tax deduction, and instead of giving that $1 million to AT&T, if I had $1 million, I don't, but and instead of giving that $1 million to AT&T, I can keep it in my own pocket. Now, it's very, very hot money. I got to figure out a way to launder it. So what this company and the oligarch who ran it, this Russian company, did after they stole this money in this tax scam, $230 million, by the way, they laundered that money by buying, quote, high-end Manhattan real estate. A money laundering operation. Now, who has been on the other side of these money laundering operations ever since the U.S. banks refused to loan him any money because he's such a bad businessman? He couldn't keep a business solvent. He had to declare bankruptcy 4, 5, 6 times. Donald Trump. In fact, the whole Trump crime family, the Trump organization. I believe that what we're seeing right now is going to be the core of the Mueller indictment of Trump and an impeachment effort, which is that Donald Trump made his money after his major bankruptcy, after he pissed away all of his daddy's money, all $470 million that he appropriated from his father's estate, after he just went through all of that and was broke and bankrupt and was the butt of jokes in New York back in the early 2000s, the late 90s. Nobody took him seriously. He made his what would you call it, renewal, his return to the stage of New York real estate-dom by being the guy on the receiving end of laundered money. Not just from Russia, from all over the world, but also specifically from Russia. And I'm guessing in this case, well, he doesn't want us talking about that. So let's go on TV and talk about the wall. And all the media will go, oh yeah, let's talk about the wall. Let's not talk about Veselnitskaya. Let's not talk about Trump being a criminal or the entire Trump crime family engaging in criminal acts. Let's talk about brown people coming into the United States. This is what Trump wants. Any way he plays it, he wins. If the networks had said, no, do it on YouTube, like they said to Barack Obama when he wanted to talk about DACA, because they said, oh, that's just a partisan thing. If the networks had said that to Trump, he would do it on YouTube, and he would claim victimhood. He wins. Tonight he goes on the national networks. He wins. This is just so obvious. Why is this not obvious to everybody else? Why is this not obvious to the media? Hey guys, ABC, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, you're being played by one of the master con men of the 20th and 21st century. I mean, honestly, one of the master con men. Back with your calls and more of the news of the day after this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. Thom Hartmann here with you 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Let's see here. Phoenix in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Phoenix. Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
There.
What's up?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller.
Thank you.
I wanted to discuss the damages of unintended consequences. For example, this lady called you earlier and asked about why the government had shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember a time when it didn't do that. You know, before they passed this law, which is a self-imposed law with that cap on spending, and they have to raise the cap on spending each time.
Right.
It's rather like Paul Ryan's telling his wife, honey, I'm not going to pay the grocer until you let me buy a new fishing rod, or in this case, build a new wall.
Yep.
And I know you understand the money system, Tom, because you've had Stephanie Kelton and Randall Ray and other MMT people on your show.
Mm-hmm.
And the unintended consequences of not understanding our money system brings us all these conspiracy theories, like people that get so upset and they say, oh, the Federal Reserve and the creature from Jekyll Island, and because they don't understand the system. And there was a wonderful book written back in the 90s called The Deficit Lie, Exposing the Myth of the National Debt, by a guy named Rick Boettger, Boettger.
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm a little bit nervous.
It's okay.
And anyway, in this book, he explains how the national deficit actually works. And even I read books of people I don't agree with, like Mitt Romney's partner at Bain. I'm not going to, take up for a vulture capitalist, but in his book, Unintended Consequences, even Bain says a nation never goes. This guy from Bain says even a nation never goes broke owing money to itself.
Right.
But because people have trouble with abstractions, they come up with all these ideas like, we've got to have a balanced budget amendment.
Well, it's because Republicans are constantly talking, they're constantly using home budgets and home economics as if they apply to government. And I'm sorry, if I am in debt, I have to pay that debt. I do not issue my own currency. We don't have Hartmann dollars, right? We just have dollars.
Yes. Yes. And remember, with people who have trouble with abstractions, they don't understand that your Social Security money, which is what the government creates anyway, it's taken out of your paycheck and then it's put into Treasury bonds, which the government also creates.
Right. That's about $3 trillion of our national debt is actually our own money being saved for us.
Exactly. And some people have so much trouble with abstractions that one congressman said, where are those treasury bonds? Where are they? And they actually built a building and put filing cabinets in it to put treasury bonds in it for people who have trouble with abstractions.
That was back during George W. Bush's presidency when he said that, you know, it's just paper. It's just paper. Remember, he held up one of those, said, yeah, it's just paper. Yeah, so's our
Right.
currency. So's a check.
And so, yeah, and because we didn't understand how the money system worked, we screamed for this cap on spending, and this is what it brought us. And now, because we don't understand the money system, we're crying, oh, give us that balanced budget amendment. Every time we've had a balanced budget, we've gone into recession thereafter.
Yeah.
And even Milton Friedman, the right-winger, he said, look, you've got to have a money system that grows. He suggested 3% per year.
Yeah.
That the government should just create that money.
Yep, absolutely. Phoenix, thank you for the call. You obviously know what you're talking about, and you're absolutely right. It's 22 and a half minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Got to check it out. So, how do we respond to this? What do we do about this? What's the best? You know, I think what I'm doing here, I hope is an important part of this, and that is calling out what Trump is doing, number one, and calling out what the media is doing, number two. If this is the kickoff of Trump's 2020 campaign for re-election, and I'm telling you it is, it's a really bad omen that the networks are scrambling all over each other to be the first to say, yeah, we'll put you on the air. We would love to carry the Trump reality TV show. Trump gets ratings. NBC knew that. Now we all can have Trump ratings. That's what's going on. The networks apparently, when Obama said that he wanted to talk about DACA, they thought, well, that's boring. We're not going to do that. That won't get ratings. So here we have this insane scam being played out literally right in front of us. Gwendolyn in Rialto, California. Hey, Gwendolyn, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call. Yes, I do want to make some statements, actually, and this is the way it goes. The wall is not about protecting our borders. It's about white supremacy.
Of course.
Yeah, but to something that I wrote, and I just want to get your thoughts on it. In terms of where Trump is heading us in this country, 2 principles that Hitler propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels followed. A lie told once is a lie. A lie told 1,000 times is the truth. Don't play towards people's intellects. Play towards their emotions. Divide, chaos, and conquer.
Right.
A dictator is born in the midst of division and chaos, and it feeds on both for its survival.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And Sean, if you could pop me up here. Here's FDR talking about that. This is FDR.
Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood. Always a big one. For its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
There you go, Gwendolyn. You nailed it. Thank you very much for the call. I mean, this is exactly what's going on. And Franklin Roosevelt called it out, and he said, "This is the behavior of fascists, right? This is what the fascists do." Welcome to America. 27 minutes past the hour, coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll pick up your calls after the break. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Defending America from the conservative weapons of mass deception. Right here, every day. Thom Hartmann. Today we're reading from the Constitution Today by Akil Reed Amar. This is from it's a collection of essays. This is from his essays on the judiciary. This was originally published on Find Law in 2002. It's titled More on Unfree Speech. The Supreme Court prohibits network television cameras and radio microphones from its public oral arguments. Transcripts of the back and forth between attorneys and the justices are not posted on the court's website until weeks have passed and the public's interest has waned. Members of the public may not even take notes in the gallery about what is being said in open court. Meanwhile, in its opinions, the court trumpets the importance of free speech and a free press. On the topic of free expression, why doesn't the Supreme Court practice what it preaches? That was the question Steve Calabrese and I recently posed in an op-ed in the New York Times, marking the opening of the Supreme Court's term earlier this month. Here I'll expand on the court's reluctance to welcome the First Amendment into its own courtroom. The First Amendment is the darling of the current court. Though sharply divided on many other issues, justices across the spectrum agree that free expression rights should be construed broadly. But the court's love affair with that First Amendment is a relatively modern development. Less than a decade after the adoption of the Bill of Rights, circuit-riding justices enthusiastically enforced a 1798 sedition law that made it a federal offense to criticize the president. Early in the 20th century, the court upheld punishment of a newspaper publisher for editorializing against state judges. During World War I, the justices sent Eugene Debs, a notable presidential candidate, to prison for peacefully criticizing the government. Indeed, before 1925, the court had never, not once, used free expression principles to invalidate government censorship, even as it routinely construed property rights broadly to invalidate economic regulation. Today's justices have repudiated this regressive legacy, but the residue of the early court's indifference to free expression remains visible in the court building itself, as the aforementioned rules and practices indicate. Perhaps these court rules and practices do not literally abridge freedom of speech or of the press, but if not, they sure come close. After all, the apparent purpose of these rules is precisely to limit free expression and free thought. Consider the rule against note-taking. A person in the courtroom can clean his wallet, or twiddle his thumbs, or tug his earlobe, or engage in countless other mindless activities, but is prohibited from engaging in the cognitive and expressive activity of writing down what he hears the justices saying, along with his own comments or questions or criticisms. Consider also the rule against the media's cameras. The court's rules do not bar security cameras in the courtroom, and such cameras may well be in the room for all we know. What the justices are banning is thus not cameras per se, but network television cameras, cameras that might broadcast information about the court to the American public. The harms that these rules seek to prevent are harms that pivot on the acts of thought and expression themselves. And these are the very sorts of harms the government typically may not seek to prevent under the Supreme Court's standard First Amendment case law. To put the point another way, no Supreme Court rule bars carrying a pencil into the courtroom or wearing a chopstick in one's hairdo. The ban is not based on security concerns, but is rather directly aimed at expressive activity per se, using one's pencil to take notes. More generally, one of the core purposes of the First Amendment is to protect a robust and timely public discourse about government officials and government decision-making, including, of course, judicial officials and judicial officials' decisions. But that discourse is precisely what is dampened by the court's own rule about its own building. This is especially so because the day of oral argument is one of the 2 days, the other being when the final Supreme Court decision is announced, that the American public and the American media are most likely to focus on a given legal case. If discourse that day is dampened, the public has lost a unique and irreplaceable occasion for democratic discussion and deliberation. When it comes to other government arenas, post offices, airports, school grounds, and so on, the court has typically insisted that such forums allow as much speech as is functionally compatible with the basic purpose of the arena. Yet in its own building, the court represses expressive activity without any strong showing of incompatibility or disruption. There is a word for this, and it is spelled hypocrisy, hypocrisy. The court's transcript policies are also unfree in another sense. In the days after oral argument, the transcripts are anything but free. The court gives a temporary monopoly to a private company, which in turn charges high fees for transcripts. The court would never, nowadays at least, give a private company a monopoly over its written opinions. Why should its oral arguments be treated any differently? There's nothing secret or confidential about oral arguments. Unlike judicial conferences where justices deliberate privately among themselves, oral arguments take place in open court. They are public events conducted by public servants with public money. The public deserves full access. To recast the point in the language of federalism, Americans outside the Beltway deserve electronic access comparable to the ability of those who live in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland to attend arguments in person. If television cameras are not acceptable, at a minimum, the arguments should be carried live on public radio, as happened in December 2000 for Bush v. Gore, and transcripts should be freely available immediately. The book is The Constitution Today by Akil Reed Amar.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Wow, here's an amazing story. This is from today's Wall Street Journal. Silicon Valley giants Facebook, Twitter, and Google's YouTube unit have made a concerted push to seek out input from hundreds of groups, a growing number of which lean to the right. The companies have become receptive to behind-the-scenes lobbying as well. Among the initiatives, Facebook has privately sought advice from the Family Research Council, a conservative Christian public policy group, and its president, Tony Perkins, according to people familiar with the meetings. Twitter's chief executive, Jack Dorsey, recently hosted dinners with conservatives, including Grover Norquist. Advisors on the left include the Southern Poverty Law Center for users frustrated by the lack of clarity. Oh, this is amazing. It's just amazing. Anyhow, Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that every time the news media talks, says something about the border wall, they show a picture of it. Okay, every time, but never do they say that we have a barrier up there already.
Right.
What's wrong with it?
Right.
Not one time. They also don't point out the fact that the Republicans have been in charge for 2 years. They waited until the Democrats took control before they wanted to shut down the government.
Yep.
That's all I want to say. I just want to point out the obvious. Okay.
Yeah, if they actually wanted to fund Trump's wall, they could have done it long before now. You're absolutely right. They control the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court for the last 2 years. They could have done it anytime they wanted. Michael, spot on. Thank you. Very well said. Ken in Great Falls, Montana. Hey, Ken, what's up?
Yeah, I'd like to take this weapon away from Trump by giving him a green wall covered with 32 gigawatts of power. I won't go into all the...
He's already said that there should be solar panels on top of the wall.
But here's the point that I'd like to give by especially, is that it would pay for itself. We could give it to him. It would shut down over 50 coal-fired power plants. That's what it would do. Plus, it would kick the Green New Deal into high gear.
Yeah, here's the problem, Ken. That area is so rural and so far from any major city centers that transporting the electricity would be insane. Plus, the wall itself is you know, a moral obscenity. Plus, you're screwing with Mother Nature in a big, big way by you know, blocking the flow of migratory species through there. It's just a bad idea. I get the, you know, how you know, cute, for lack of a better word, the idea of, yeah, sure, Trump will give you the wall, cover it with solar panels, and, you know, hurt ExxonMobil. But you know, and I understand what you're saying, Ken, and I empathize with it, but it's not going to happen. Ken, thanks for the call. Michael in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Michael.
Well, hi. Yeah, that's kind of getting back to earlier with regard to the libertarian gentleman.
Oh, my debate with Charles Sauer in the first hour of the program.
Yeah. And Paul Krugman wrote an article back on the 5th of January regarding Alexandria Ocasio. I'm going to mess her name up. Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, or you can call her AOC.
Yeah, and he says in there her advocacy of this rate. He goes, it's obviously crazy, right? I mean, who thinks makes sense? Only ignorant people like Peter Diamond, Nobel laureate in economics and arguably the world's leading expert in public finance. And then later says, why do all these conservatives adhere to a tax theory that has no support from nonpartisan economists and is refuted by all available data?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man.
The whole thing is really good.
I agree. And you know, thank God, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she's increasingly being called, sort of in the tradition of RGB, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that she is saying the absolute truths, right? America prospered when the top tax rate was above 70%. She is saying these absolute truths, and in ways that are causing the media and the Republicans, the conservatives' eyes to just bug out of their heads, but they are just simple truths. Michael, thank you for the call. Ruth in Carlotta, California. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Regarding your argument with Charles Sauer, here's something that I don't hear mentioned, and I think it is the counter to him saying that people today are better off than they were when we were growing up. And that is that when we were growing up, you and I, nobody bought things on credit.
Right. Oh, I couldn't even get a credit card until I was in my mid-20s.
Right.
You know,
everybody appears to be affluent today because half of them are up to their eyeballs in debt.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, okay, that's it.
Okay, well,
point that out.
Spot on. You know, $2 trillion of the consumer debt via credit cards will really do it. Yep. Annie in Sugar Grove, North Carolina. Hey, Annie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm going to bring it back to the discussion that you had on the EPA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw this article, but apparently in Pence's state of Indiana, Johnson County, Indiana, in the city of Franklin, it's a suburb of Indianapolis, they're suing, they're Trump voters, by the way, they're suing the EPA. About a dozen or more children have come down with some really bizarre cancers.
Oh, they've got the same problem in New Hampshire, where they're getting these cancer clusters that seem to be associated with industrial pollution.
Yeah, and what happened was Obama, you know, with the EPA had set some regulations to, you know, contain this mess, clean it up, and it's all been, you know, thrown to the wayside. So here's some quotes from them. They're saying that it's infuriating. The environment is being ruined for money. This administration would have the public believe that pollution is good and government life-saving regulations are bad. They're actually saying this.
Yeah.
And they voted for Trump.
Yep. And I doubt they will again.
And the thing is, it's like, you know, poison and pollution doesn't know the difference between Democratic children and Republican children. You know, and these Republicans are like, oh my gosh, hair on fire. Now they're suing the EPA. Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. And
that's all I had to say.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. Very, very well said. Alomi, am I saying that right, in Cleveland, Ohio?
Yes.
Hey, what's up?
How do we stop Nazism from taking over America?
Well, I think it's a two-step process. Number one, you resist it with every tool you have, you know, every legal tool that you have, like lawsuits and things like that. And number two, you educate people as to what it really is and where it leads, and, you know, which is part of my mission here with this program. Why do you ask?
Thank you for doing that, and that it's needed, but a lot more voices are needed to be heard.
I agree. And that's where you can amplify things. You know, if you find media, individual shows, individual articles, you find media that you think is important, that you really like. A lot of the progressive media, like Alternet, for example, where I just published a piece on time for the corporate death penalty, has been excluded now from Google searches because Google says they're not, they're too biased, while right-wing websites are just fine. They're all over Google searches. So, this is this corporate bias that I was referencing a little earlier. The thing that you could do is take articles on Alternet and start, sharing them with everybody you know on social media, because, Google won't. And et cetera. We've got to get around the barriers, the corporate and institutional barriers to progressive messages. Thanks for the call. Alina in Seattle. Hey, Alina, what's up?
Yes, hi. This is kind of to your previous caller. I'm calling from Seattle, and was reading my local paper, Seattle Times, and there's a terrified article about a teacher who, in Hamilton International Middle School, where my son actually used to go to, he saw some flyers in the school promoting some right-wing hate YouTube personality. And he decided to devote a lecture to his students. He's a social sciences teacher. And somebody in his class recorded his lecture and posted it online. Now he's the target of attacks, and the school has been threatened. There was police, and it's terrifying. And how do we stop this?
Yeah.
It's scary to teach now.
I agree, Alina, and it has been for some time, by the way. This is a tactic that right-wingers have been using, particularly on college campuses, that goes back to the 80s. This really started in a big way during the Reagan administration, when these billionaires started funding these right-wing think tanks that would then fund people like, the equivalent of O'Keefe, back in the day. And I think the way to fight it is, number one, to point it out and share public outrage, because that's the strategy that they're using, and whenever possible, to legally challenge it. But just pointing it out, it's a terrible thing. It really and truly is. Alina, thanks for the call. Kelly in Elmwood Park, Illinois. Hey, Kelly, what's up?
Yes, hi, Tom. First, I'm going to make this very quick. You're a hero of mine, and I sincerely mean that.
Thank you.
I never heard anybody say this, but why doesn't Trump get on TV and say, "I tell you what, I can raise the money. Since we're going to build this big, beautiful wall, why don't we fire all these Border Patrol people, get rid of them all, because you're not going to need it, because we have that big, beautiful wall, sell all the equipment, surveillance equipment. That way you'll save on health care, you'll save on pensions, you'll save on overtime. You can reduce the military budget. Let's take all that in mind, save all that money, and pay for the wall like that. Why doesn't he just say that?"
Yeah. Have you seen the new Vicente Fox video that's all over YouTube?
No, I haven't.
Vicente Fox is the former president of Mexico. And he says...
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I have. Go ahead, but explain it. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's speaking to Donald Trump on camera, and he says, Donald, you're going to spend $25 billion on a wall. And now these bad hombres here in Mexico have figured out a way around it. And I pulled out this schematic from the dark web to show you what we're going to do. And he holds up a crayon picture of a ladder. And he says, you're building a $25 billion wall that can be defeated by a $25 ladder. Really, Donald? It's
Tom, can I mention one thing real quick? And I do want to.
You got 5 seconds, Kelly.
Real quick, I've never been such a saint of America, and this guy's putting an awful stain on this country.
Yeah, I agree. But he's not the first. I mean, Trump is the logical progression of what began under the Reagan administration. Kelly, thank you for the call. It's a real tragedy. Coming up in 4 minutes, we're going to be checking in with Talk Media News to get an update on the world's news. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Also in our third hour, Matt Getz is going to drop by, as well as Tom Perez. So stick around. And welcome back. Lawrence in El Cajon, California. Hey, Lawrence. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I just listened to your FDR speech, which is so right on. And so I have in my life a couple instances where I've seen the effect of some tremendously unbelievable story become so believable because it was presented in a way that made it seem even so bizarre.
Well, and most importantly, repeated over and over and over again. That was his point, which Trump has been doing now since his campaign about the southern border.
Oh God, that's. Have you ever read The Hunting of the Snark by Lewis Carroll?
Oh yeah, but when I was a teenager.
Here we go. This is what's going on right now. The bell ringer. I mean, the bell ringer, when he rings thrice, that becomes truth.
Yeah.
And Trump, ironically, every time he speaks, he says something 3 to 4 or 5 times in the same paragraph when he's talking. So it becomes truth right there by the bell ringer of the hunting of the snark.
Yep.
And that when they're hunting the snark, they're going after a piece of land that is remote from them. And so they have an argument about how big the map should be. And they somebody decides that they should make it as big as the area they're going to. But then an objection arises. If they open the map, the crops will fail. And this wall thing is as absurd as that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the other day, in the last 2 days, there's been Nielsen saying 3,000 terrorists, Sarah Huckabee saying 4,000 terrorists, Pence saying 10 terrorists per day are captured at the border, and this is all iterated by Trump. And so they've said the thrice thing with the administration now lying through their teeth.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Trump coming out and saying 17,000. I've been waiting for them to say, okay, everybody who's captured at the border is technically a criminal because it's a crime to cross the border without permission. And therefore, 100% of the people who've been captured are criminals. And therefore, we're catching, 30, 40,000 criminals a year. I'm waiting for that. And in fact, it wouldn't surprise me if he tries to roll that one out tonight. Lawrence, spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Very well said. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Hi, good afternoon. The reason I called was when watching your show today, I was reminded when Trump became president, he kept saying that how he wanted to find out who voted against him by saying there was all this voter fraud.
Right.
But now that when you have the so-called emergency, now all of a sudden he can find out who his real enemies are, and then that could really cause, as you indicated earlier in the show.
If he declares a state of emergency, he will be able to suspend all what's called wire communications in the law, which includes the internet, telephones, television, cable, everything. He can not only suspend it, he can censor it. He can read your emails. He can get your browser history. And if he designates you, Sean, if he says, oh, that Sean guy is a potential terrorist, if he designates you, then your employer can no longer write you a paycheck. Your bank can no longer keep your accounts open. They have to freeze them. Your credit card companies can no longer allow you to use your credit cards. You literally can't buy a loaf of bread unless you have cash in your pocket.
Sounds like fun, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is bizarre. I mean, this is the direction that he wants to go. This is nuts. Sean, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. We're going to check in with Luke Vargas at Talk Media News in just a moment. Here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you for supporting our program. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. Luke Vargas, the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, joins us today from the UN in New York. By the way, you can search Luke Vargas or Talk Media News for podcasts. You can hear Luke break down the one world news story every day if you check out his podcast. Luke, welcome back to the program. U.S.-China trade talks are ongoing in Beijing. One of the stories I read early said that the Chinese and the U.S. were only sending second level or third level people, actually, assistants to, like not Lighthizer, but Lighthizer assistants. So Trump, Lighthizer assistant, third level, and that the Chinese were doing the same. And then I read a piece in the Financial Times yesterday saying, no, actually kind of the vice president of China showed up. They're taking it very seriously. What's actually going on?
Yeah, you're right. They were intended to be second-level talks, so it was between the deputies for Bob Lighthizer, for Steve Mnuchin, for Peter Navarro, instead of the top men themselves. But yeah, you're right. The Chinese sort of upended things on day one, and this could sort of seem like a surprise that was in a negative sense, but actually you had the Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, who I'm just learning to pronounce his name, decided to show up. He's the top Chinese trade negotiator, and instead of startling us, and I think that's actually been received very warmly as a sign that China is taking this very seriously. The talks they've agreed to go into a third day on Wednesday, which is also a positive sign. President Trump tweeted out this morning that the talks are going, quote, very well. It's hard to kind of evaluate that because he didn't provide more details, but most of the optics here, I think, generally speaking, are viewed as being quite good. And China has also made a few official announcements, which apparently have somewhat appeased the American side. And that's where I think opinions will start to divide as to whether they're actual signs of a breakthrough or just efforts to try and get us to accept a quick victory. China yesterday approved 5 different genetically modified grain crops, which are produced in the United States, for import into China. Those are crops that the Chinese regulators have been very hesitant to allow in, and the Trump administration has been asking, as a part of trade talks since, I believe, the very beginning of 2017, that China clear these grains for export. And
these
now
are
they've
Monsanto
done that.
Products?
Yeah, I don't know
Probably,
for a fact.
Yeah.
But or at least adjacent.
Well, yeah, both countries right now have an economic downturn or the potential of one, the early warning indicators of one that might be helped or resolved if they can both declare victory, go home, and stop the trade war. So, we'll see how this shakes out. Meanwhile, the Taliban says in Afghanistan, we don't want to negotiate with you anymore, U.S. Is that because Trump is, preemptorily pulling troops out of both Syria and Afghanistan?
It's a little unclear how serious this is from the Taliban. They, had been confirming up until basically this morning that they were totally on board with planned talks with the United States on Wednesday in Qatar, and at the very sort of 11th hour today, they've now said they're not okay with the Afghan puppet government being there in any form. I think it's maybe a little bit too early to judge exactly how these talks are going to work out, and maybe they can be salvaged. I wouldn't put it past them. But I think the bigger question, and this is sort of a general observation that we all need to be quite cognizant of as we head into 2019, is that the Taliban holds 60% of Afghanistan right now. This is the most territory they've held since 2002, and it took 100,000 U.S. troops to get that number down again. And in particular, experts I've talked to say, look, the level of urban terrorism in particular that's back in places like Kabul makes a complete mockery of this notion that with America's help, the U.S. and the Afghan government have been able to create what they call the Ring of Steel in Kabul. And you put it all together, if Trump was basically persuaded to join into these Taliban talks last July by people like General Mattis, because President Trump said, I'm just going to pull my troops out anyway. And they convinced him, do some talks with the Taliban, see if we can, at the very least, cobble together some sort of political agreement that would prevent utter chaos when the U.S. withdraws. If the Taliban is now saying, we're done, we don't even want to participate in these sort of pretend talks anymore, it might just fuel the instinct on Trump's part to get out. And maybe that is the right move. Maybe there is no solution, if we want to call it that, for Afghanistan. But I think you are seeing a higher risk than we may have predicted weeks or months ago of what people like Ian Lustig at University of Pennsylvania have said, which is that you're going to have a fall of Saigon type scenario where Kabul very quickly once the Taliban says it doesn't want to play nice, once the U.S. makes it clear troops are coming out, the Western countries that still have a lot of folks there counting on security from the U.S. to a degree are going to say Kabul's not viable, this whole thing is falling apart, and perhaps that's the next area beyond Syria that we should be watching for a possible U.S. withdrawal if indeed these Taliban talks truly fall apart. So tumult in Afghanistan is possible in the medium term, even if maybe it's a little bit too premature to judge what today's sort of announcement by the Taliban means.
And I think this was predictable right from the day that George W. Bush invaded Afghanistan. They've never been occupied. New research from Johns Hopkins tells how much Americans are overpaying for health care compared to the world. What's the number, Luke?
25% higher. It's about $10,000 a year, 25% higher than number 2, which is Switzerland. And the big takeaway here in 15 seconds is that it's not just that we're utilizing services more. In fact, American access is lower. We have 2 fewer nurses per 1,000 people than the OECD average, 1 fewer physician, 1 less hospital bed, and about half the doctors graduating medical school. It's not that Americans are using more services. We're just paying more for what we get.
Amazing. And they're being rationed by AMA and their buddies. Luke Luke
overrides are everywhere.
Yeah, there you go. Luke Vargas, Chief Foreign Correspondent for Talk Media News. Thanks, Luke. And you can follow Luke at The Courier over on Twitter. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. For our book club today, we're reading from a book by Elizabeth Holtzman, one of the former U.S. Congresswomen who sat on the committee that considered impeaching Richard Nixon. And this book is titled The Case for Impeaching Trump. Just came out. This is from the first chapter titled Impeachment. When Donald Trump's presidential election victory was announced in the early morning hours of November 9, 2016, like many Americans, I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and dismay. 2 questions raced through my mind. What had become of America that a man so unfit, so small-minded, so mean-spirited could be elected? A man whose ethnic and racial bigotry had set the stage for his presidential run when he called Mexicans rapists and made racist birther attacks on President Barack Obama, whose vulgarity and misogyny were laid bare in the Access Hollywood tape when he bragged about forcibly grabbing women by their genitals, whose performance at presidential debates showed him not only flagrantly ill-informed, but manifestly unwilling to get informed? My second question was about how much harm this man would do to America as its 45th president. I have my answer now to the latter, less than 2 years after the election. President Trump has damaged American democracy far more than I would have guessed. He has refused to protect our system of free elections from foreign interference. He has relentlessly attacked the administration of justice, in particular the investigation into a possible conspiracy with Russia regarding the 2016 presidential election, putting himself above the rule of law. He has failed to separate his personal business from the country's, flouting the Constitution's requirements, and he has violated the constitutional rights of the people in separating children from parents at the southwest border without due process of law. And to cover up these misdeeds, he has systematically lied to and assailed the press. These are great and dangerous offenses that the framers of our Constitution wanted to counteract and thwart. They provided a powerful remedy: impeachment. Many tremble at the word, fearing how President Trump's supporters will react to an impeachment inquiry, worrying that it will only further polarize an already deeply divided nation, or that there will not be enough votes in the Senate to convict him if the House of Representatives votes to impeach. Just calling for an inquiry will be viewed as a Democratic Party attack on the head of another party, a kind of coup d'etat. It's easy to find reasons to be anxious, but I'm not afraid. As a junior congresswoman, the youngest ever elected at that time, I served on the House Judiciary Committee that voted to impeach President Richard Nixon for the high crimes and misdemeanors he committed in connection with the Watergate cover-up and other matters. Through thorough, fair, and above all bipartisan, the committee acted on solid evidence presented in televised hearings that riveted the nation, handing us the blueprint for how impeachment can be successfully pursued today. In our 225 years of constitutional democracy, the Nixon impeachment process has been proven to be the only presidential effort that worked. Though Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, 2 weeks after the committee's impeachment vote, he did so to avoid the certainty of being impeached and removed from office. We became a better nation for having held the president accountable. All of which raises two further questions. Should we be considering the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump? Will we again become a better nation by pursuing that option? To answer, we need to set aside President Trump's unremitting attacks on the environment, on our close allies, on the Affordable Care Act, and any disagreements we have over policy, as well as any personal animus, and simply ascertain whether he has engaged in the kind of egregious conduct that would meet the constitutional standards for impeachment and removal from office. This means we have to focus sharply on his potentially impeachable offenses. In doing so, we will find it useful to compare them, when possible, to similar offenses by President Nixon, found to be impeachable by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. Here is a list of some of President Trump's potentially impeachable offenses developed as of this writing. A possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. On May 9, 2017, Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who is investigating both his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's connections to the Trump campaign in connection with influencing the 2016 presidential election. 2 days later, President Trump admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that Comey's firing had to do with that, quote, Russia thing. In other words, President Trump acknowledged that he was trying to shut down the FBI investigation into his own possible conspiracy with Russia. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The Comey firing uncannily echoes Nixon's firing of the special Watergate prosecutor for seeking highly damaging information about that president, a brazen defiance of the rule of law that triggered the start of impeachment proceedings against Nixon. A second possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. President Trump has persistently and publicly attacked those heading the Russia investigation, including Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and has repeatedly condemned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself, suggesting that he wants to fire any and all of them in order to get control of the Russian investigation. He actually did give an order to fire Mueller. A failure to care that the laws are faithfully executed is required by the Constitution. To try to deflect public concern about his possible role, well, it continues from there. The Case for Impeaching Trump by Elizabeth Holtzman.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And once again, greetings to listeners in New York City, listening on WBAI in New York. On the line with us is Matt Gertz. He's a senior fellow at Media Matters, MediaMatters.org. You can tweet him at Matt, G-E-R-T-Z. Matt, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us. You were yesterday writing and talking about, let's try to stop Trump from going on the airwaves today. Obviously, that's water under the bridge, as it were. But your piece today, even after Chris Wallace debunked it, Fox and Friends stands by the White House lie about terrorists at the border. Let me lay out a scenario for you and get your feedback on it, if I can have a minute or two to rant about this, and then we have a conversation, okay? It seems to me that this tonight is going to be the rolling out event of the 2020 Trump re-election campaign. The proof of that is this ad, which I'm going to play in just a second. You won't be able to see it, Matt, but you'll be able to hear it, that is running. I saw this on Meet the Press on Sunday on NBC, on MSNBC here in Portland. I'm guessing that they're doing buys all across the country. This ad, and it's from the Trump 2020 campaign. In fact, very end it says, "I'm Donald Trump. I approve of this message." Here it is.
Drugs, terrorists, violent criminals, and child traffickers trying to enter our country. But Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer care more about the radical left than keeping us safe. The consequences? Drug deaths, violent murder, gang violence. We must not allow it. Every country defends their borders. President Trump wants to defend ours. The Democrats must stop playing politics and support real border security now.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Now, that's a campaign ad that they are playing right now. And, back in 2016, when President Obama wanted to talk about DACA to the nation, the network said, no, you can't do that. That's partisan. That's campaigning on your part. And yet now it's like, oh, well, this is just fine. It seems to me like tonight is the official kickoff of Trump's campaign, and that if he declares a state of emergency and if the federal courts shut it down like they did with his Muslim ban, he wins because he gets to say, I tried. And then he can do the whole conservative snowflake thing of, but they stopped me, send me more money. In fact, I got an email this morning, just 2 hours ago, from the Trump-Pence campaign. Fred, I gave him $5 back in 2016 as Fred Flintstone. Fred, I will be addressing the nation tonight at 9 p.m. EST on the humanitarian and national crisis on our southern border. Just look at the facts. Drugs are poisoning our loved ones. MS-13 gang members are threatening our safety. Illegal criminals are flooding our nation. I want to make one thing clear to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Your safety is not a political game or a negotiating tactic. And then he goes on. And then it says, that's why I want to do something so huge, even Democrats with the fake news can't ignore it. We need to raise $500,000 in one day. Please make a special contribution by 9 p.m. EST to our official Secure the Border Fund and have your name sent to me after my speech. And then it says, contribute $250, contribute $100. What the hell is going on with our media, Matt?
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that all of these broadcast networks are getting hoodwinked pretty badly on this. As you say, this is going to be a political speech. It's going to be the president, going before the nation and basically complaining about how the Democrats aren't letting him do what he wants to do. And he'll be talking about the same things that he's been talking about for years: the need for a border wall, the dangers of criminal, undocumented immigrants, and so on and so forth. We're only supposed to have these sorts of big presidential addresses where everybody preempts their programming when the president is doing something really urgent. This is just going to be, as you say, it's a stump speech, right? It's him basically going through all of the stuff that he's been going through for a very long time, and he's managed to get all of these networks to give him their airtime, basically because they're afraid of him. They think that if they don't give him what he wants, then he'll say mean things about the fake news media again. And
do you think it's that they're afraid of him, or that they are salivating at the ratings? Donald Trump is a reality TV star. He made a hell of a lot of money for NBC. You had Les Moonves, the CEO of CBS, saying to his shareholders on a shareholder call, Donald Trump may be terrible for America, but he sure is profitable for CBS. Keep it up, Donald.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical about the ratings argument on this one, just because they're all carrying it together, right? And so there's not really any advantage for one particular network, whereas, if even one of them were to say no and run their regular programming, they might be able to get a little bit more money out of just doing that.
Right.
I mean, the fact that they're all lining up together to me says that it is less about ratings and more about fear that an administration that has constantly demonized the media is going to do it again. I think that's stupid on their part. I mean, it's not like by giving him this airtime they will be spared in the future. Yesterday morning, hours before the White House asked for this time, the president was tweeting about how, the fake news media is out to get him, and he'll continue doing that tomorrow, regardless of what happens tonight, or whether he gets covered or not. But yeah, I mean, the real emergency for the president right now is with his base. It's the sense that if he doesn't deliver on the wall, or at least show that he's putting up a good fight, that they're going to abandon him. That's why we ended up with this with this government shutdown in the first place, right? Yeah. I mean,
there's another real emergency. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The Senate unanimously passed, budget legislation. We were all set to move on, and then the president watched some Fox News where they were complaining that he was about to, abandon his wall, and he instantly, changed on a dime and shut down the government.
Right, and I think this is working for him in conservative circles. But it seems to me like the real emergency he's facing is the TSA. If TSA stops staffing, they got all these guys calling in sick. The lines are getting longer and longer. And as long as it only hits economy passengers, it's not going to probably be that big a deal. If the lines go from 30 minutes to an hour, which is where they're in that range right now. But, if the TSA gets strategic and starts shutting down the pre-lines where the media travels through, where the executives travel through, where wealthier people travel through, there's going to be hell to pay.
If U.S. congressmen cannot get back to their districts for the weekend, this whole thing is going to go away pretty fast.
That's right, and I think we're within a week of that because their next pay period is is coming up next week, and if that happens, he's got a serious problem on his hands. So I think he just wants to declare victory, toss it to the federal courts, even though the federal courts will block him in all probability, just like they did with the Muslim ban. He was happy with that. He was very happy because he got to play martyr. He got to play snowflake. In fact, 3 different times it went to the federal courts, the Muslim ban, and every time he used it again to tell his base, see, I'm keeping these brown people from the Middle East away. Now I'm keeping the brown people from south of the border away.
Yeah, and I think this is the sort of broader danger that you have with someone like Donald Trump in the White House, right? I mean, there's a general sense that we could have these sorts of broad national emergency statutes because no one would use them for something this blatantly political and this obviously, something that did not qualify on this level. There's no reason to think that there's an actual legitimate national emergency that could somehow be fixed by appropriating funding to build portions of a wall that would take a very long time to finish. That doesn't make sense. That's why you have the budget process. If the president wants to get his wall built, he needs to get Congress to appropriate funding for it. That's how this is supposed to work. And Republicans controlled Congress for the last 2 years and didn't bother to do this. So that pretty clearly says that most of the Republicans in Congress don't think this is worth doing either.
Right. No, and they haven't for some time. And in fact, all of the easy, the low-hanging wall stuff has already been built, mostly by Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And some of it even during the early years of Obama's administration, in areas where there was high population density, where it was easy to get to, where they didn't have to take land from private landowners. Now that they're talking about moving on into Texas, that land is all privately owned, or the vast majority of it, and they're going to get a hell of a lot of pushback. I mean, you've got Republican congressmen who represent the border areas who are opposed to it because they don't want to have these eminent domain fights. The whole thing is just BS. So how do we, Matt Gertz, how do we respond to this? How should the media respond to this? How should the Democrats respond to it? And how should progressives who are politically active respond to this, in your opinion?
I mean, I think the media has already made the biggest mistake just by deciding to cover this as if it's a major address.
Right.
But I mean, now that they've given that up, I think that it's incumbent on them to do really vigorous fact checking and really look at what the president is saying tonight and do their best to try to keep misinformation from getting out to the public. That's going to be incumbent on them. For the Democrats, I mean, I think they too are going to be spending a lot of effort trying to, get the focus back on the need to reopen the government and on the damage that the president's doing to the country by refusing to reopen it.
Right.
And I think progressives need to be pushing on both of those levers, both on the media and on the Democrats, to get them to do their jobs.
Yeah, amen. And we'll see. TSA, I think, may have the final say on all this, but time will tell. Matt Gertz, writing for Media Matters, MediaMatters.org, senior fellow over at Media Matters. Matt, thanks a lot for dropping by today.
Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and the program and your calls and all that other kind of stuff all together here, right here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 16 and a half minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And just a quick FYI, in about 15 minutes, Tom Perez is going to drop by, too. This should be interesting. Stick around. Back with your calls after this. And welcome back. Kim in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Kim, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. This is the first time I've called in, and I hope that I can articulate well enough. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this whole thing about Fox News giving Trump permission to go. I believe that this is all under the direction of Russia. They have not quit interfering, and they're creating chaos with the tariffs, with the shutdown, with the wall. And that is what Russia is really good at, is propaganda. And I want people to start being, wake up. The other thing I wanted to say, Tom, is there a mechanism, I know at the state level, that people can recall, people who are in government that do wrong things? Can the people recall Trump?
No, they can't. We don't. There's no mechanism for that in the Constitution. The only mechanism for removing the president, well, there's two now in the Constitution. Originally, it was impeachment, and then some years back, after Jack Kennedy was killed, they added the 25th Amendment, which requires the vice president to declare that the president is no longer capable of executing the responsibilities of his office, and then a majority of cabinet members have to join him. And at that point, the president is removed, the vice president's put in charge, unless the president himself objects, and then it goes to either the House or the Senate for a vote. The 25th Amendment's, I think that's Trump has done such a good job of stacking his cabinet with sycophants. And you got Mike Pence out there, this morning in the media, just lying through his teeth on behalf of Donald Trump. He is totally become, Donald Trump's Rudolph Hess. I mean, he's become his right-hand man. He's become the guy who's willing to do anything to serve the Fuhrer. And so I'm not hopeful. Kim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Kurt in Beverly Hills, California. Hey, Kurt, what's up?
Hey, Tom, the first time talking with you this year, so Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Back at you.
All right, good. Hey, are you familiar with the old short film, black and white film that came out after World War II called Don't Be a Sucker?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, yeah, well, for those who...
It was an army propaganda film about not listening to Soviet propaganda, but it was a fascist propaganda.
Well, yeah, it was an anti-propaganda film.
Right, I know.
It was warning us, after World War II, America, we were trying to rebuild. We were trying to, build factories, get life back to normal, but there were still individuals within our own country that were still pushing propagandist ideas that we had just spent 500,000 military and civilian lives lost in World War II to beat back.
Right.
And so I think that the best rebuttal that Chuck and Nancy can do this evening is to play a clip from that film and remind America of why we spent so much in blood, sweat, and tears to beat back the Nazis of Nazi Germany, and let them know that we cannot turn back the hands of time.
Yeah.
We've come too far to try to make this a perfect union, a perfect country to live in, and fulfill the dreams of our forefathers. And we just cannot let it go.
Yeah, and the dreams of our children as well. Kurt, well said. Thank you very much. And yeah, this is the perfect response to Trump: is no, this is our country. This is a republic. This is a democracy. We're not going to go down this fascist route. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Greg in Mountain Home, Arkansas. Hey, Greg, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I read a story just the other day from the New York Times that put it out originally. I think it was last week, and Newsweek picked it up. And they said the whole wall deal of Trump is they had to come up with a memory trick to get him to remember to talk about immigration.
Right. So he wouldn't wander
Oh.
off into discussions about, how cute his daughter was and weird stuff like that.
Right, exactly, because he wouldn't read things that they printed for him, and he went off on his own tangents. And this wall thing was all just a trick to get him to talk about immigration.
Yeah.
So the whole wall thing is baloney.
Yep.
I mean, nobody is talking about that. It was in the New York Times, and Newsweek picked it up. And did you read that? I didn't.
I did. Yeah, it was BS from
Okay.
the get-go, and in fact, that's been known for 2 years now. I mean, that was first reported several years
really?
ago. Yeah, in fact, it was Cambridge Analytica that came up with "Build the Wall" and "Lock her up," those two slogans. And Trump was very skeptical that either one of them would actually be something that people would be enthusiastic about. And boy, was he wrong. And he discovered that the first time he rolled these things out at a rally, and people just bought into it. And Cambridge Analytica was right. And then his so yeah. Greg, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Barbara in Seattle. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Well, I'm trying to call you because I think the Democrats ought to run on Eisenhower's farewell address and George Washington's farewell address. Besides, I think the Democrats could just shut up and just run FDR's statements.
Yeah, I agree. But
I think the reason I'm really calling you is because the economics problem is that people have not read the Global Minotaur or Yanis Varoufakis' other book, The Poor Must Suffer What They Want. And if you read those books, you will know who won the Second World War for us.
Okay.
And it was the great partisans who defeated the Nazis in Greece in 1940, October 28th. And also, Eisenhower only had to fight 1/3 of the divisions from Hitler.
Yeah, no, the Russians handled the rest of it. All great points, Barbara. Thank you very much for the call. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm calling up about the state of emergency that Trump is allegedly going to call tonight.
Right.
My research shows that we actually have been in a state of national emergency, starting with George Bush, who on 9/14/2001 signed Proclamation 7463, which gave the president kind of extra powers, and it's been followed through. And if anybody wants to do any research, they can jump onto USA. There's a guy named Gregory Corte, and the title of the thing is A Permanent Emergency. Trump becomes the third president to renew extraordinary post-9/11 powers.
No, you're right, Robin.
And
There's
this has
also
been
a great in-depth piece about this over at theatlantic.com, about the emergency powers that have been in place since 2001 and how Trump might be able to expand them. It's chilling.
What bothers me about Trump is something that you've said about him forever, and that is he gets people to look what his right hand is doing, and in the meantime, he's really pulling something off with his left hand. And my instincts in this situation is that there's the anti-BDS legislation that's coming in, and boy, that just may slip under the radar during all this hoopla. So,
well, I don't think this has anything to do with that,
tonight.
frankly. As much as I think that that's an affront to the First Amendment, I think that what this really has to do with is we're looking at the kickoff of Donald Trump's 2020 campaign. Greg in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Greg, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller. I have a fairly simple solution, but not easy to responding to Trump tonight, and that's to not watch.
Right.
And,
yeah. If I didn't do this show, I would not. I mean, I have no I have no choice.
But watch it on YouTube, like we had to for Barack Obama's speech.
Yeah.
An hour later, how much difference is an hour going to make?
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem I see is we all have to do it now. It's like looking at the accident as you're driving by it. It's like,
yeah.
let's go do something for somebody else that we don't expect a return on for that hour that he's talking, and then come back and watch it. And,
well, here's the other thing, Greg. We don't know that it's going to be an hour, number one. And whenever he stops, the Democrats are going to start with their rebuttal. So if that starts 12 minutes in or 17 minutes in or 23 minutes in or 41 minutes in, whatever it may be, if you're not watching, you're going to miss that. I'm not telling people that they should watch this thing, but I do think that we need to watch the Democrats' response. But I totally get what you're saying. I wish that there was enough of a groundswell, but you can't beat a showman. I mean, at show. Right, this guy is the carnival barker. He's P.T. Barnum all over again. Greg, thanks for the call. I absolutely agree with your sentiments, Greg. Absolutely.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this. It's 27 and a half minutes past. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat, the True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages, end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And again, a tip of the hat to WBAI. Just picked up our show, our newest affiliate, 99.7 in New York City. On the line with us is Tom Perez, the DNC chair, former U.S. Secretary of Labor. Democrats.org is the website. You can tweet him at Tom Perez. Secretary Perez, Tom, welcome back to the program.
Tom, it's always great to be with you and your listeners. Happy New Year, belatedly.
I appreciate your making yourself available to us because it is, this is a very progressive show, and occasionally, we have conversations that I think really push things, and I appreciate that.
I love being on your show, Tom. I loved it when I was Labor Secretary, and I love it now, and I love your listeners.
Thank you, Tom. There is an ad running right now. Nate, I don't know if you can cue this up, and we could even play it for Mr. Perez, for Secretary Perez. There's an ad running right now. I saw this on Sunday on Meet the Press. And it's gotten more than 10 million views on social media. It is paid for by the Trump 2020 campaign. Literally, Donald Trump is campaigning as we speak on the wall. Here is a clip from that. Do we have that, Nate? Oh, we don't have it. I'm sorry.
I saw the ad, Tom.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. And then also, back when Trump was first running, and it looked like, I thought that he had a chance. I gave him $5, his campaign, in the name of Fred Flintstone, and I've been on his fundraising list ever since. And I got an email 10:30 this morning Pacific time, about an hour ago. It says, Fred, I'll be addressing the nation tonight at 9 p.m. on the humanitarian and national crisis at our southern border. Just look at the facts. Drugs are poisoning our loved ones. MS-13 gang members are threatening our safety. Illegal criminals are flooding our nation. I want to make one thing clear to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Your safety is not a political game or a negotiating tactic. And then we need to raise $500,000 in one day. I want to know who stood with me when it mattered the most. So I'm asking my team to let every American patriot, let me know the name of every American patriot who donates to the official Secure the Border Fund. Please make your contribution by 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our official Secure the Border Fund. And so I can have your name sent to me after my speech. And then it says contribute $250, $100, $50. The networks in 2014 refused to allow Barack Obama to address the nation about DACA. You were in the administration at the time. You were Secretary of Labor at that time, I believe.
Remember that well.
And they said that the reason why they wouldn't let him do it is because they thought that his talking about DACA was a political stunt and it was an election year. Donald Trump this week, in the last 7 days, rolled out a national advertising campaign for his reelection. Is fundraising. This is the third fundraiser on this issue I've gotten in the last 3 days in email. How the hell can these networks say that this isn't just purely political?
Well, it does feel political to me, and that's why we were joining the cacophony of people pointing that out to the networks. I'm heartened, I guess, Tom, that Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer will have equal time following the address tonight, because this is a political address. Make no mistake about it. There is no humanitarian crisis at the border. This is a manufactured crisis by this president. For partisan political gain. I'll ask the following question. Who said the following? And I quote, "There's no credible evidence of any terrorists coming across the border from Mexico." That is not a quote from Tom Perez. That is a quote from the State Department.
Right. This
United States State Department. That's the situation. We saw this in the run-up to the midterm elections, where every day on Fox News it was about the caravans. It was distracting Donald, wanting to distract attention away from health care and all the issues that people really care about. I thought Mexico was going to be paying for this wall, right. And here we have the government shut down to basically pander to the base, and we really shouldn't have Rush Limbaugh being the de facto commander-in-chief, because that's what's happening right now, and that's why this is so cynical. And Tom, I spent a lot of time working as a career federal worker. People have to, they got bills to pay. I was reading quotes from federal workers. One who said, "I voted for one," and he's the one who's doing this. I thought he was supposed to do good things for me. It feels like I'm a hostage. Well, they are being held hostage. Yeah. And there's so much, again, distracting Donald. He doesn't want to talk about health care, doesn't want to talk about anything else. And again, I must remind everyone, the Senate and the House before the Christmas holiday passed a bill and sent it to the president. Didn't include funding for a border wall. The Republicans were on board with that.
You're right.
Here we are.
It got over 80 votes in the Senate, as I recall. So it seems to me that Donald Trump himself politically is facing a serious crisis, and that is that TSA agents are starting to call in larger and larger numbers, calling in sick. And if they shut down the TSA pre-lines, then suddenly the influencers, the decision makers, the people with power, the people who make political contributions, who go through those pre-check lines, those high priority, basically anybody's got a first-class ticket on an airline, those people are going to start being majorly inconvenienced, because typically a pre-check line, as I'm sure you know, is like 1 or 2 minutes, whereas a normal line is 30 or 40. If that happens, he's screwed. I mean, it'll turn so fast, among other things. I mean, there's all these other things. So he wants to resolve this. This is my analysis. I'd love to get your take on it. He wants to resolve this right away, but he wants to save face. So he comes out, declares a state of emergency or some other clever device to say, hey, I've solved the problem. And immediately that gets thrown to the federal courts because you guys, the Democrats, challenge him, sue him. Immediately, just like with the Muslim ban. The Muslim ban, went through the federal courts 3 different times. Each time Trump won, I mean, he lost in court, but he won in the court of public opinion over on Fox News and among his base because he was seen as, I'm fighting to stop those brown people from the Middle East from coming into our country. And now he's saying, I'm fighting to stop those brown people from south of the border from coming into our country. So, A, he can reopen the government and say that, mission accomplished. And just, tell Mitch McConnell, go ahead, pass the bill that Nancy Pelosi just got through the House. We'll sign it. B, he gets repeat events if this thing goes back to court over and over again. And C, most importantly, he gets to play the favorite role of conservatives in America ever since the Reagan era, which is that of victim. He gets to be the snowflake. Oh, my God, they're stopping me in the courts. Please send me another $50. This guy's already raised $100 million for his election campaign. It's absolutely unprecedented. He's got all these people just cranking money out at him. What do you think? A, do you think that analysis is accurate? And B, if so, what are you going to do about it?
No, I mean, I think you're spot on. And again, in declaring a national security emergency, that simply belies the facts. And, one of the things I'd use in a lawsuit would be what I just told you. And again, I quote from the State Department, there's no credible evidence of any terrorists coming across the border from Mexico. I'll remind our listeners here, Tom, the 9/11 terrorists didn't come from Mexico. They came in on airplanes. They came in on tourist visas. They, in some cases, I believe, overstayed that visa, but they didn't come from the Mexican border. And so the factual underpinning for declaring a national emergency is not there. I'd frankly be attaching as part of a lawsuit some of the fundraising solicitations, because this does seem to be a fundraising ploy. It's the woe be me sort of victimization that he loves to roll out. I mean, again, this is distracting Donald. Let's not talk about the real issues. We've got folks who are diabetic, and you know how much the medicines, insulin has gone up in the last 2 years? Why aren't we talking about that right now?
Yes.
A bipartisan fix to make sure prescription drugs.
David Hogg tweeted out this morning, you got 40,000 Americans died because of handguns last year. Isn't that a national crisis?
Yes. I mean, we can go down the list. Anyone with a pre-existing condition. You look at the situation in so many communities across this country. Why don't we talk about the fact that we're building more prisons than schools in all too many states? That to me is a failure of moral leadership at a minimum. That's what we should be talking about. And again, this is a distraction. And I'll tell you, you talk about the TSA workers. There's so many other ramifications of this. I mean, food safety. There's a lot of food safety inspections that aren't going on. So do we need to have an outbreak of some foodborne illness again because there's not enough safety inspections before we do something about this manufactured crisis?
Right.
$5 billion is to close the federal government after both houses of Congress have sent you something because Rush Limbaugh and that crew got in your cage. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
This is, I've seen a lot of government shutdowns, unfortunately. I was working for Senator Kennedy in 1996 when Gingrich shut the government down. Didn't work for him. It's not going to work for this president. We're going to stand firm.
I hope so, and I hope that you can figure out a way to win the PR battle, because I think that that's what's really going on here. I really believe this is the kickoff of his 2020 campaign.
I agree.
Yeah, I wish you the very best. Tom Perez, chair of the DNC.
Take care.
Thank you, Tom. Great talking with you. Democrats.org is the website. You can tweet him at Tom Perez.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. We'll pick up your phone calls right after this. And welcome back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I just wanted to agree with you. I think this is the start of his President Trump's campaign. But I just wanted to add to it a little bit. Much to my fear, I don't think we can really rely on Democrats because, I don't blame them. This has just become too political. I heard a couple of interviews this morning. One was with Kamala Harris. She would not commit to saying whether or not Donald Trump should be impeached. She said, she has information from her Intelligence Committee stuff, and she won't comment on that. And then there was also a guy, Mark Kirkhonen. He presents himself as a unbiased, non-political immigration expert, and he says that Democrats are chasing their Captain Ahab against this wall.
Anybody who claims, Dave, that they are non-political and nonpartisan and don't, swim in political waters, and then they're an expert on one of these topics that's been highly politicized, is either lying or is a Republican.
Oh, yeah, I think the guy's a total crypto-Trumper. Because, he also said that the Democrats, that we have, liberals, that we have some sort of, what did he call it? He called it a bias about, an anti-white triumphalism, he said. I could not believe that. I'm like, that's insane. But anywho, and it's bad. And we unfortunately, I think we have to rely on Republicans because this thing with Russia, this, and you already went over it, this Prigozhin Investments Limited, they were laundering money along with working in cooperation with Deutsche Bank in 2013. And this spy they just caught, Dmitry Makarenko, they're going to trade him for Paul Whelan, apparently. Now we're doing spy arrests, counter espionage. And this guy was also from 2015 wanted on some sort of espionage. And these things, this is the Russian playbook. And I don't know, long story short, Tom, I don't know if you're a fan of the Godfather movies, but remember when Abe Vigoda, his character, was Mike was going to kill him because, he betrayed the family. But Abe Vigoda saw his grave sitting there. And he saw the guys with guns. He knew what was going to happen. And all he cared about was Michael's feelings, Michael Corleone's feelings. Well, remember what he said? He looked at it and said, Mikey, this is about business. And I don't know. That just keeps replaying in my head with the Russians. This is, with Russia and China, is getting dangerous. We're like, 50 years from the anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Trump's about to give a nonsense speech that many Americans consider equal to the Cuban Missile Crisis speech in importance.
No, it's an extremely dangerous time, Dave, and on a whole lot of fronts. It's not just in those two places. You've also got the danger of an eruption in the Middle East. You've got the danger, I think the biggest danger is, frankly, another 9/11 in the United States, a spectacular attack, a large-scale attack by some terrorist group. And, whether it's Muslim terrorists or whether it's somebody else. This is, I think, frankly, that Trump would welcome something like that. He would love to be George W. Bush. Dave, thank you for the call. Yes, we need to impeach this guy now. And David Leonhardt has pointed out in the New York Times, we don't need to wait. We've got plenty of evidence of impeachable crimes right this second, and all of them are a whole lot bigger than lying about a BJ in the White House. We'll be back. Here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Tim in Harpersville, New York. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, I'm wondering the costs of the immigrants that are coming into the country down in the South. They are costing us a lot of money.
I don't believe that that's the case, Tim. Outside of the cost of $700 a day to imprison people, but that all goes to private corporations that kick money back to Republicans. But the reality is that undocumented immigrants in this country are paying billions of dollars a month into Social Security and in federal and state taxes. Now I agree that people who are here without documentation should not be working in this country. But when Ronald Reagan in 1986 said, I'm going to break the unions in the construction industry and in the meatpacking industry by stopping the enforcement of the laws that would put wealthy white employers in jail if they hired people who are in the country without documentation, I'm going to break the back of these unions. He declared that, and he did it. And those industries no longer are unionized industries because of that effort. And no president since then has gone back to saying we need to start putting white, wealthy employers in jail. Mitt Romney suggested this, and they ridiculed him. He said people will self-deport if they can't work. It was true, by the way. Prior to 1986, you had about 1 million people coming north every year, and you had about 1 million people going south every year. They'd come here for the picking season because agriculture, ever since the late 40s, had been the one industry that was exempted from that employers go to jail rule. Reagan exempted all industries from that rule as part of his campaign to destroy the unions, and it's worked. But the simple reality is you're not going to stop people if they're offered a job. I mean, I don't know if this is still going on, but it was certainly going on 7 or 8 years ago. There were broadsheets, because I saw them. There were newspapers like the shopping guide that you get at the local supermarket that are printed in Spanish that are distributed south of the border from companies in the northern Midwest. Construction sites, meatpacking plants, big ag operations, in some cases even fracking operations, saying if you can make it to North Carolina or to North Dakota, if you can make it to Nebraska, if you can make it to wherever, here's a job for you. These are help wanted ads. People are going to do anything to help their families. And not to mention, I mean, this is not even talking about the fact that most of these people who are coming into the country since 2009 are not looking for good jobs. They're actually trying to avoid being murdered in their home country because of U.S. foreign policy. But the simple fact of the matter is that if we started prosecuting employers, you would shut down that entire business. And Romney was right about this. Back to you, Tim.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Okay, but I found when I was working in Tucson, Arizona, I had employees tell me that if you can't do the work, I'll hire a couple of Mexicans and get the work done.
That must have been post 1986, because if that was pre 1986, people would go to jail.
I'm sorry, that was in the 90s.
Yeah, that's what I said. It was after 1986. 86 was when Reagan stopped enforcing the law. Tim, thanks for the call. Alan in Seattle. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. It's amazing to me how the Republicans create these crises and then they yell and scream about them with absurdly expensive solutions that are going to kick money back to their contractor buddies. And then once they even pretend to solve the problems that they created, they want credit for it. It just boggles my mind. Sorry, Alan. Back to you.
Okay. Yeah, the one point I wanted, well, I have like 3 points. The Trump, when you're talking about Trump and all the things he's doing, but he wouldn't get away with this if he didn't have his enablers in Congress, Mitch McConnell being one of the lead ones.
Yep.
And in this whole manufactured crisis, Trump is going to go out and use, military money to build his wall.
Right.
And, that's an executive action. Well, if I remember correctly, DACA was an executive order from Obama because Congress
wouldn't act.
Wouldn't discuss immigration.
Yeah, but it wasn't one that appropriated money. It used DACA used the existing immigration system and simply changed specific criteria. So Obama could do that by executive order. What you can't do by executive order is spend money. The Constitution is very clear about that. Spending money is the sole province of the House of Representatives.
Right.
Or Congress more generally, but it has to always originate in the House.
Yeah, it certainly set the Republicans' hair on fire because, oh my God, he's overstepping his, presidential authority. And yet, this Congress, or the recent Republican Congress, didn't do anything.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Alan, I want to get one more caller in here. I just have a minute left in the show. Cartel in Lancaster, Texas?
Cartel, yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Hartman. My name is Cartel Adams, and I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I'm very disappointed in our democracy. When a person can lose practically about 3 million votes and still get elected.
Yeah.
They say it was the electoral process. And, I don't think we have slavery anymore, where 50 million people versus 1 million people have the same voting power.
Yeah. No, Vicente Fox the other day, the former president of Mexico, referred to Donald Trump as the president of the Electoral College rather than the president of the United States. Cartel, and thank you for the call. It's spot on. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, oh man, it is not possible to have a functioning democracy, a functioning republic, if the people are not well informed and engaged. Right? We've got to do that. It doesn't work without that. And that means you can't just sit back and complain about it. You've got to get out there and get active. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.